We're on.
Did you get dinner or no? Did you get dinner?
My friend Eleni is filing, so she's running against me on the school district area. Yeah, so she would have that.
The only one?
I don't know, we might, I don't know.
Certainly go with the one. As I look at it, it's.
No, it's like
All of this.
every 4 years, like it's just long enough for me to forget everything. Like I'm like, where do I set my name? And I was telling everyone, like the questions aren't hard, but they're like, what talks? Why is that hard? It's so frustrating. Hello.
Hey, good to see you.
Thank you for being here.
Of course. I'll send my home away from home.
Oh, you're here.
These are different.
Great.
Oh, yeah, you weren't here. Oh, sorry. Just,
I'm gonna let you know we have fully upgraded
the
the
blue
microphone.
one,
I have to hold it down.
the blue one, if you just want to talk briefly, you would hold it down to talk.
Okay.
And if you want to talk like for a while, you push the red and then release.
Okay.
But
There's
no
not
lights.
a light, it's how you tell is it's pushed down lower.
Are we ready to go? Good evening, it is 6 p.m. and I'm calling to order the Sunnyvale School District Special Board Meeting on April 6, 2026. I see that all board members are present, so we can begin. Please note that a recording is being made at the direction of the board, and the recording may capture sounds of those attending the meeting. Okay, we're going to approval of agenda. If there are any members of the public who'd like to speak on this item, which is solely about the agenda, please raise your hand or turn in a blue card in the room. You do it.
Oh, is it possible to speak after the report?
Yes, there will be opportunities. Okay, not seeing any comments, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Sure, I move to approve tonight's agenda as presented.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the agenda passes 5-0. We are going on to the flag salute. Tonight's flag salute will be led by Superintendent Danielle Casper.
Thank you very much. Please stand, face the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, I got it. Okay, and we have the living land acknowledgement, brief acknowledgement of land life. Sunnyvale School District is located on the ancestral and unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who have peacefully honored and cared for this land for thousands of years. We recognize that every member of the Sunnyvale community continues to benefit from the land and occupation of this land. We acknowledge our responsibility to learn from the wisdom of the Ohlone people and to consider how we might work to repair injustices and move forward together in honorable ways. Okay, so we are on public comment, and I just want to say to everybody in the room that this is an opportunity for public comment for things on the agenda, but also this agenda item. So if you would like to speak now about the agenda item, you may do that. And then there's also an opportunity after the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to read the words around this. If there are any members in the public wishing to make public comments, please submit a blue card in the room or raise your online hand. This portion of the agenda provides an opportunity for members of the public to directly address the governing board on any item of interest to the public. However, provisions of the Brown Act Government Code 54954.A, .2A and .3 preclude any action being taken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Time limits allocated to public testimony are 3 minutes per person, 20 minutes total for public comments. Speakers are asked but not required to give their name and affiliation so that an accurate record is reflected in the minutes. Are there any public comments at this point?
None.
Okay, moving on to the discussion item. And we have a presenter here today. We have Mr. Scott McGuire from Arena. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. You ready to get started?
Yeah, may I just provide a little bit of context? So tonight we are joined by Scott McGuire from Orenda Education, and Orenda is a nonprofit organization that partners with school districts to strengthen systems and improve student outcomes. They've been doing this work for over 25 years, alongside with districts in California to close opportunity gaps through an equity-driven, data-informed practices that support leaders, teachers, and students at every level of the system. And so I want to thank Scott and Orenda for joining us and partnering with us to do this work. And then also just preface this as that, this is additional feedback that we're getting. And as a school district, we wanted to, really be committed to improving our systems and looking at the systems in a term of a reflective way. This is by no means any blame on any individuals in the system. I want to recognize that we have very committed and dedicated staff who are passionate about the work here and supporting students. And really it's an opportunity for us to get some additional feedback in terms of where are some areas that we can refine to make an even bigger, more positive impact as well. So with that, pass it over to Mr. McGuire. Thank you.
And I appreciate it very much. And trustees and community, I appreciate you, Superintendent Crossway. Thank you so much. This has really been a kind of a labor of love for us. Our team started in December, and we were here for 5 or 6 weeks. Every site got visited, some in a 3-hour visit, some in a 3-day visit. So we had light touch visits and deep dive visits. Don't Google it, we made the terms up. But one thing first and foremost is that, and we do this work all over the place, rarely are we treated and or greeted as we were from the Sunnyvale community. So that not only speaks volumes for your community, but the schools, and the warm and welcoming environment. So from our team to back to the community, we appreciate you very much. Just really quick, a couple kind of setting the table, because this is really meaty in terms of the quantity of information. Just know that for things to have been a finding and or a recommendation, they would have had to have been triangulated with 3 different types of data. First and foremost is that we interviewed and surveyed any and all district staff that were willing to participate. I think we had almost 400 surveys. We interviewed staff at the deep dive schools. We interviewed not just teaching staff, classified, counselors, wraparound supports. At the light touch schools, teachers all had access, and all staff had access to surveys so they could kind of also participate in that way. And administrators at all levels, both site and district, were also interviewed by the team. So we hope that the resulting findings or recommendations not just find fertile soil, right, to grow, but really work as a launching point for the next best thing, potentially next steps here in Sunnyvale. Just know that what's the best way to put it? It's be in the mindset of refinement, right? That there are some fantastic things that are going on in the district, and with minor 1-degree tweaks here and there, there's some things that could really flourish. So, but without any further ado, let's hop in. First and foremost, we start off with commendations, right? These are the most positive initial kind of feedback that we get just from a vibe and community-based metric. And so teachers and staff across the district demonstrated a strong commitment to their work and that of student success. Strong trust-based relationships between students and staff members. Everywhere we went, admin, teachers, custodial staff, everyone knew the kids' names, the kids knew all of their names, and it felt like a very authentic kind of back and forth, where kids were honored as whole beings, not just people on campus. School classroom environments were welcoming, they were inclusive, there was seating arrangements so that kids could have collaboration and peer-to-peer discussion, very much learning-rich environments. Staff engage in collaborative and supporting professional practices that include PLCs and data teams, and they're really having the right conversations down at the site, and then looking to have those be from more of a systems view than just lie within the site is the sweet spot and the magic. And then educators were passionate. Teachers are going home every day exhausted, working hard, and really striving for those highest outcomes for all of their kids. And the hope is through this process that we can identify some systems-based efficiencies and inefficiencies that can really help with those student outcomes. First and foremost, also nothing that you'll find in a finding or a recommendation here comes from lack of effort. It also doesn't fall into one person's lap or any individual's lap. These are systems that people have been living for a very long time. And it is something that's very difficult to approach from within, right? It kind of sometimes does take an extra set of eyes to come in who's not part of the fabric of the community to say, you know what, this may be an area for refinement. But just know that when we do so with the utmost respect, and we also honor the work that got you here. Because there are some fantastic things that are going on in the district, and your staff, from classified to teacher to admin, they're working their tails off. The study seeks to answer three main questions. One, what's the current student success profile? Two, what systems explain that success profile? And then ultimately, what can be done to accelerate student success? So we start off with the lay of the land, right? We're gonna start off with demographics and some community-based information. So from a data perspective, all of the data, well, majority of the data in the presentation is from 24-25, because that was the last full school year of available data through the data systems locally and through the state. If there is current year data, which, you know, the SBAC, the high stakes testing data will be of current year, but just know that 24-25 is the last full year of data. So from a student perspective, total enrollment was roughly 5,764 students in the district. From a student perspective, 41% of your students identify as Hispanic or Latino, 26% identify as Asian, 18% identify as white, 4% identify as Filipino, with an 11% quote unquote other. Other it constitutes 2 or more races at 7.9%, 1.3% African American, and then single digits of American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Pacific Islander. From a teacher's perspective, 56% of teaching staff identify as white, 16% Asian, 16% identify as Hispanic Latino, 4% 2 or more races, 2% not reported. And then for classified staff, 36% identify as Hispanic Latino, 29% Asian, 20% white, and 11% other. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into the student donut now. Again, total enrollment at 5,764. You have about 52% of students identify as male in the district, 48% identify as female. You have 28% of your current enrollment is currently experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement, okay? You have 14% of your students currently on an IEP, okay? And then in terms of language fluency, 47% of the students are English only, 29% of students in the district are current English language learners, 14% have reclassified as English language learners, and 10% were initially fluent coming into the district. If you take a deeper dive into the current EL status sliver of the language fluency pie, you have around 1,100 students that have been in U.S. schools between 0 and 3 years, Remember, that's not the equivalent of age or grade. It's just the quantity of years that they've been in US schools. You have 244 students in the 24-25 school year that had been in US schools for 4 or 5 years, and which puts them at risk for long-term English language learner status. And then those kiddos that have been in the district for US schools for 6+ years, 242. And in the state, in terms of a multi-language learner, they'd be considered long-term English language learners at that point. Okay? We want to acknowledge the diverse languages that are spoken within your district. Your multiple language learners are not monolithic. You have a range of languages spoken in the district, which is fantastic. I want to call attention just to this kind of red box here, and I know it may be a little bit different to see for those who are in person. Just know that from a CalPADS data perspective, you had since 2021 to 2023, you had it was labeled as traditional Spanish, and then in 23-24 it shifted down to Castilian. We know you did not have all of a sudden 1,200 students from Spain come. All it is it was I think a demographic button. The wrong demographic button was clicked when submitting the data to the state. So it shows just a shift there. I highlighted it so you know it's not an internal mistake. It's just the way that the data is reporting, okay? So we'll do a little bit deeper dive of students on an IEP in the district. So district, roughly 14% of the district students have an IEP. That goes toward, in comparison to 12% at the county and 14% at the state, right? So you're right in line with both of those numbers. We take a look at then how students are identified based on student group. And so what you'll have is we look for disproportionality, right? Are some groups more identified as compared to others? And ultimately you look for things that are, the larger span usually raises the biggest flag. So you have 9% of students on an IEP, 9% of females are on an IEP compared to 18% of males, right? So there's a double up in terms of students identifying as male being identified as compared to female. 18% of students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Again, when we talk about a district average of 14, those aren't necessarily highly disproportionate. We call them out just because they're a little bit elevated. And then when you come down to English language learner, overall it's 20%. However, long-term English language learners, which are 6+ years in U.S. schools, and those that are at risk for for long-term English language learners at 4 and 5 years in U.S. schools are at 44 and 41% identification for an IEP. The issue therein lies, you don't know if it's kind of the chicken or the egg. Is it that they have language fluency issues because of a learning challenge, or do they have are they currently experiencing language challenges that are misdiagnosed as or mislabeled as a learning challenge rather than just a language challenge? This study does not seek to answer that question, other than just to highlight the data to say this is a bit elevated, maybe something to look in on and follow up with. The other group, lastly, that is more on the elevated side are those students identifying as African American. I do caution though that the denominator of that group, meaning the total number of kids in that group, is relatively low, which makes that percentage volatile, right? A handful of kids move in and out of that group. It means the percentage swings can be pretty wide. So again, something just to keep an eye on. Then we looked in the 24-25 school year at how students qualified for their IEP. The largest group, 209 students, have speech and language services, followed by autism at 188 students. Then 182 students with specific learning disability, and then so on. We're going to get into the point now where we start talking about community-based vulnerability and academic achievement. So this is like a 5 or 6 slide chunk that is simple in nature, but seems complicated in the beginning. So I'm going to do my best to make sure I explain it well. What we do as an organization is we take every single school and district in the state, every single one of them, and we tier them based on 2 things. One, and we'll start with community-based factors of vulnerability. There are 6 of them that we use. They include, and they're largely out of school and district's control. There are things that are associated with the community, not practices within the school. So for instance, income level of the home, violent crime per 1,000, educational level attainment in the home, percent English learner, percent students on an IEP, and the percent of student mobility. Okay, so when you take those 6 things and you rank and stack all of the schools and all of the districts in the state, you get 3 kind of bands, and we tier them in 3 different ways. There are the more vulnerable contexts. That's where there are more hurdles and more barriers using those 6 metrics for students in their context. There's vulnerable, which is again would be a moderate level. Your vulnerable schools, your moderately vulnerable schools in this instance are Bishop, San Miguel, Lakewood, and Vargas. And then you have your less vulnerable situations, which are Cumberland, Cherry Chase, Sunnyvale Middle, Fairwood Elementary, Columbia, and Ellis. Okay? We'll get into a little bit more about what those metrics are and kind of as we go through. From a district perspective, again, here are our 6 rankings. It's socioeconomic disadvantagement, violent crime per 1,000, college degrees in the home, student mobility, percent English language learner, and percent of students on an IEP. Now, socioeconomic disadvantagement, violent crime per 1,000, and college degrees in the home are associated with the school's physical address. Not the zip code, not the area, the actual address is entered, and that's where those demographic data come from. The other 3, student mobility, English language learner, and special education percentage, are based on the enrollment of kids at that school. In this case, your district school. Say it again?
I was gonna say that secondary is more useful in certain circumstances.
So when stacking all of those metrics vertically for all of the, in this case, districts in the state, Sunnyvale has a vulnerability percentile of 77 percentile, which means that Sunnyvale is less vulnerable from a community-based metric than 77 out of 100 schools, okay? That there are 23 other districts out of 100 that are less vulnerable than Sunnyvale. So it is in the less vulnerable category. On the other side of this coin, we look at academics, okay? Now, being a K-8 district, we don't look at things like grad rate and A through G and all those other high school metrics. What we do, because it's comparable throughout the state, is we look at CASP, or Smarter Balanced Assessment, in 2 different areas. One, ELA, obviously, and then math, where we look at it for all test takers, and then we look at it for students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And we do that both for English and for math. And when you take those 4 metrics, again, and line up every other district in the state ranking based on percentiles is that Sunnyvale is achieving at the 20th percentile as compared to all other districts in the state using those 4 metrics. That means out of 100, there would be 80 that are outperforming Sunnyvale using those 4 metrics. Now, Sunnyvale was also a less vulnerable district. So when you look at other less vulnerable districts, the percentile drops to 5 percentile. So 95% of less vulnerable districts are outperforming Sunnyvale in these 4 total metrics. And again, that's SBAC ELA for students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and then the same 2 categories for math. Now, going back and forth is difficult when doing long-term, having the relationship and looking at these things from an achievement versus the community-based factors. So we look to come up with a number, a relative advantage number. And what that is a school's and or a district's percentile ranking for achievement minus their vulnerability percentile. The goal is to see, is a school and or a district underperforming based on vulnerability, performing right at where vulnerability would predict students to perform, or outperforming their vulnerability. If a district and or a school is performing right at where vulnerability would predict, that number would be 0. If the school and or a district is outperforming their community-based vulnerability, then that number would be in the positive. If a school and or a district is underperforming vulnerability, then the number is in negative. So we have Sunnyvale's numbers from 22-23, 23-24, 24-25. And what you'll find is that the relative advantage, how Sunnyvale compares to the other districts, has become less competitive, not more, at 52%, 52, minus 52 relative advantage, minus 57, and minus 68 in the most recent year. You say, Scott, how does that happen? We made incremental growth moving forward. You know, what does that even look like? Well, let's see. You have a context in Sunnyvale where over the past 3 years, your district has become less vulnerable. Okay? You had a vulnerability percentile 3 years ago of 76 percentile, then it went to 77, and now it's at 84 percentile. So technically, in the most recent year, there were only 16% of schools in the state that were less vulnerable, districts in the state that were less vulnerable than Sunnyvale. The largest change in that metric is your student mobility went from a moderate rating to a less vulnerable rating, which was the biggest kind of swayer of vulnerability percentile. Then you also look at academic achievement, right? So yes, in ELA for all grades, and over the past 3 years, it went from 55% above the line, which is met and or exceeded, to 56. It went from 48 to 52 for math. And for students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, it went from 22 to 24. So yes, there have been slight academic improvements over the course of those 3 years. But the reason why the relative advantage is becoming more negative is that those other districts in the state are achieving at rates higher and faster than you with the same groups, okay? So you picture like I ran faster than I did in my last race, but so did everyone else, and they ran just a little faster than I did, right? So it's like taking one step forward and someone else takes two. It doesn't disregard the growth that's been made locally. However, in context, it results in a net negative. So when relative advantage is broken down by school, because like I said, we do it for district and for school. Let me show you, explain how we read this chart. On the left-hand side, we have achievement level, right, which is low, moderate, and high. Across the bottom, we have vulnerability level, most vulnerable, moderately vulnerable, and less vulnerable. If a school's vulnerability is directly predicting student achievement at that school, they would fall in the black rectangle that goes up diagonally left to right. That looks like a most vulnerable school performing in the low category. It looks like a moderate school performing in the moderate category, and it looks like a less vulnerable school scoring in the high category. Okay. So we don't have any most vulnerable schools in the district. Your schools start at the moderate level of vulnerability. Bishop, San Miguel, Lakewood, and Vargas that are also achieving in the low achievement category. The number that is next to their name in parentheses is their similar schools ranking in percentile. So what that says is that out of 100, of 100 moderate schools, Bishop is outperformed by 99 out of 100. Same with San Miguel, 93 out of 100 for Lakewood. And then Vargas, the way that it works is that there's a bunch of ties, right? Because you can only have so much variance in score. And so Vargas would technically out of 100 be tied for last. So it's 0, but zero is really impossible. But it's the easiest way to kind of explain it. So then when you look at the less vulnerable schools, which are Columbia, Sunnyvale, Fairwood, Ellis, Cumberland, and Cherry Chase, you have 3 of the less vulnerable schools scoring in the low achievement area: Columbia Middle School, Sunnyvale Middle School, and Fairwood, with their similar schools ranking in parentheses next. First percentile, Fairwood at 22nd percentile. Then you have your less vulnerable schools of Cumberland and Ellis that are scoring in the moderate category, which is 43 percentile of similar schools and 51st percentile of similar schools. Then you have Cherry Chase, which is the least vulnerable school, scoring in the high category and outperforming 95% of other less vulnerable schools. Okay, so out of 100 less vulnerable schools, Cherry Chase beats 95 out of 100 of that when looking at similarities in vulnerability. So we start to now talk about, so that's the lay of the land, that's kind of the fabric of the district, that's sort of the context and the field in which we're playing on. So now we look at what student success profile looks like. Student success profile, we're going to boil it down into 3 major buckets. 1, testing and grades. 2, graduation. right? And we know that you're not graduating kids out of Sunnyvale to K-8, but there are markers, right? And there are predictors of future success that can be seen in the K-8 district, and also college and career readiness. So bucket one, the way this will work is there's a preview, and then there's data to follow. So I kind of tell you the end first, and then I'll back it up with data after that. So first, in general, student outcomes do not reach the levels that community-based vulnerability would predict. And that's actually what we just talked about with the relative advantage. Overall, data trends since pre-pandemic have been flat in both ELA and math, with recent declines for most vulnerable student groups, and that students learning English, students on an IEP, those identifying as Hispanic or Latino, and students currently experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement lag behind their classmates when looking at standardized test scores. This is here just for a real quick explanation. And everyone, wherever we go, has their own description of what educational equity looks like. And we want to make sure that we're very clear with what our take on it is so that there's no guessing, right? Since the beginning of tracking or monitoring student achievement data back pre-1950s, there's always been a gap in achievement data. That gap is almost as similar as it was in the 1950s as it is today. To the point where you can look at unlabeled achievement data for a school or a district or even a state, and without fail, you can pretty much identify which group is which group by the height of their line, even if it's not labeled. Okay. That is a travesty. Okay. It's like that everywhere, and it has been for a very, very long time. Our vision of educational equity isn't robbing Peter to pay Paul and that some kids get a higher trajectory at the expense of others. No, but it is acknowledging that more vulnerable student groups within any district may need a higher trajectory of growth so that eventually the gap disappears, but not at the expense of those that are on the top side of the gap, in concert with them. Okay? So X marks the spot. Equity lives when those two lines come together, and you can no longer tell what group is which group by the height of their line, but they both, or all of them, continue to grow alongside one another. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me through that, but I think it's important context as we start to talk about data. So in that case, I say, show me your lines. And so let's look at the lines. I don't expect you to be able to read that. However, I will explain. For context, this is Smarter Balanced, so it's CASP results from 20 to 25, the most recent results. This happens to be language arts. And I will just go through, because what I did is I labeled them on the side, so when you have your paper copy, you can look at it. I'll just explain just really briefly. Top line, and it's either district or it's state, okay? So the top line is district, students identifying as Asian. Second line, district, students identifying as white. Right after that, you have both state and district students who are not experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement. Okay. So more affluent kids. You have district students identifying as Filipino, then you have district average, and then you have state average. Okay, so state average is this orange line. Those other groups are above state average. Then you have the state average of students that are experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement. You have district students identifying as Latino. You have district students that are experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement, students on an IEP within the district, and the students that are learning English in the district. Okay. So you see the big, even though they're the span from students that are English language learners all the way up to students in the district that are identified as Asian is quite huge. But what you do look for is then you look at the relationship between your more vulnerable groups and what has the trend been over time. And really the trend over time for all the groups has been fine, right? 1 point up here, a couple points down there. You have pandemic right here in the middle. There's been a upward trajectory, right? Post-pandemic, things are starting to right themselves for most groups. Those students on an IEP and those students that are in the district as English language learners haven't necessarily had an upward trajectory in those last couple of years. And then what what I want you to pay attention to as well is that when district groups are rising, so are state groups, right? So they're rising at about the same clip. So when we talk about having an elevated trajectory so that eventually those lines cross, if everyone continues to grow at the same clip, then those lines will never cross, right? And so that gap remains. It just remains either at a higher or at a lower level. Okay? And like I said, your most impacted groups are students identifying as Hispanic, Latino, socioeconomically disadvantaged, English learners, and students on an IEP. So it's almost exactly the same for math, even to the point where the numbers are almost identical. The order is identical on the slide. Okay? Same groups are impacted, and those gaps are growing, not shrinking. So in conversation through the visitations and the interviews and the surveys, both in person and like I said, through the surveys, there was a theme emerging that that it was very comfortable to talk about some of the have and have nots in terms of academic prowess by advantaged socioeconomic disadvantagement. You know, the more resource students, achieving at higher rates than less resource students, and that being kind of the crux of the understanding within those that we talk to. So what we wanted to do is not just take the word for it, but let's look at data and see what the data says. And so what we did is we took all of the district's socioeconomically disadvantaged students, right? There's 1,058 students experiencing socioeconomic disadvantagement. It equates to about 24% of the overall population of the district. And then we broke down achievement by racial and ethnic groups. So all the kids and all the data on here are those students that are economically disadvantaged. Asian students that are economically disadvantaged met or exceeded standard on state standardized tests at a 56% clip. Those identifying as two or more races at a 50% clip. Those identifying as white at 46% above the line. Those identifying as Filipino at 39. The district average was 30. And those identifying as Hispanic and Latino that are socioeconomically disadvantaged at 23%. So if it were purely socioeconomic status, these numbers would stay relatively constant regardless of race and ethnicity. Okay? And they don't, right? There's some flux there. That does not mean that people are mindfully going out and doing wrong to kids based on racial and ethnic lines. That is not what the data suggests. However, what it does suggest is that there are embedded pieces. This is not a kid issue, right? This is something that is embedded within systems that students experience the system based on who they are in different ways, whether that's through access, whether that's through processes, and those things are largely inherited and were probably created quite a while ago. Okay? So it's one of those things where this doesn't fall in a singular person or people's or department's lap. It is just an acknowledgement that those other metrics make a difference. The other thing that I kind of use as an analogy to kind of help is the game of chutes and ladders. You know, as a kid, we'd play a board game called Chutes and Ladders. You roll the dice. If you land on the goal is to get to the end. If you land on a ladder, you get to skip steps. You get to the other closer. If you roll the dice and you land where there's a chute or a slide, you lose spaces. And so what this data kind of suggests is that depending on who you are, you may get more chutes than ladders or the opposite, just based on operating within the system. Okay? So something important to look at and to think about as you move forward and you start to analyze district level systems and policies and things of that. From graduation bucket, there are a couple indicators that we look at. In particular, we look at chronic absenteeism and we look at suspensions. The kind of a preview is that chronic absenteeism is low and has been improving in the district over the course of several years, mirroring similar trends across the state. And then overall suspensions in Sunnyvale remain low and have been low. However, there's a recent uptick in one metric, which is violent incident without injury. That's like the fight where no one got hurt. And so we'll look at, when we look at the data, you'll see that it kind of sticks out. And we'll talk about that when we get there. So this is chronic absentee data. So percentages on the left, raw numbers on the right, state of California across the top, Sunnyvale in the highlighted yellow, and Sunnyvale student groups below the yellow. So what you'll see in the most recent years, the state of California had a 19% chronic absenteeism rate, down from 25% 2 years ago to 20 to 19. Sunnyvale has a 10% chronic absenteeism rate, so just about half of what the district average is, down from 15% 2 years ago. So from 15 to 11 to 10. That's a good thing. And it doesn't happen on accident, right? So there are things that are going on that are working toward that. Then when you look at student group, you start to look at groups that may have elevated chronic absenteeism to see, is there something, is there anything else that we need to look at? Students that are currently experiencing homelessness have the highest number at 21%. However, they're down from 47% just 2 years ago. So they've gone from 47 to 33 to 21. Right? So take that into context and say, that's great progress. The remainder of those student groups land within that kind of reasonable realm. There's no finding or recommendation here other than good job, right? That's something that is moving in the right direction. So then we looked at stability patterns in the district. This is how long students are staying in the district once they start in the district. And the way we looked at that was 4 different cohorts. Kids all starting in 2018-19, starting as first graders, starting as second graders, starting as third graders, and starting as fourth graders. And did they see basically Sunnyvale to the end of completion, right? To their final year in the district as an 8th grader. And those that started in first grade remained for 7 years at a 50% clip. 54% stayed all the way through for those that started as second graders. Also 54% stayed as those that entered as third graders. And if you entered as a fourth grader in 2018-19, you saw your way all the way through at 59% clip. The one wrinkle to this data is there's still a COVID year in there, right? So when you talk about longevity, you talk about stability, until that kind of works itself out, it's just an added wrinkle, a little extra variable. But again, so that's how students are staying within the district and seeing their way through your system. The 6-year persistence rate we looked at for elementary schools, and so it's very much a similar look. Your most stable student groups were at San Miguel, and they had a 6-year stability rate at 63%. The district average was 53, and then Ellis had the least stable at 46. So then when we get to look at suspensions, your overall suspension, there were a total of 126 students suspended, okay, out of an enrollment of roughly 6,000 kids. Caveat, remember the initial slide, we said 5,740 some odd was the enrollment. Depending on the data source from the state, you're gonna get a slightly different number depending on when they pulled it. So just know that the 6044 isn't a typo, it's just from a different state data source, and they compete with one another. So we talk roughly around 6,000 kids. So there were 126 students that were suspended out of roughly 6,000 students, elementary students, which is a rate of 2%. Okay. Then we wanted to look at and say, well, of those suspensions, how many were single suspensions and how many were multiple suspensions? Did a kid just get suspended once, or were there kids that were suspended multiple times? So for all students, there were 225 total suspensions. Of that was 162 students, or 72%, were suspended one time. Of that, 28%, 63 students were suspended multiple times. Okay, so now from that point, having the district lay of the land, then you sort of look for outliers. Are there any groups that are being overly identified or overly suspended as compared to their classmates and to their district mates? And most of the numbers are relatively even. There is an outlier in terms of 89% of single suspensions and 11% of multiple suspensions for students identifying as Asian, but a super volatile denominator. It's only 15 kids. So the swing of 1 or 2 kids could have raised it 15 some odd percent just with one kid in and out. The other is semi-elevated for multiple suspensions are students identifying as white. 63% were one-time suspensions, where multiple suspensions were made up of about 37% of total suspensions. Again, there's no finding or recommendation here. It is just the lay of the land. So here's where we get into the way that CalPADS looks at it, the state looks at it. They look at it from the most serious offenses lens. Okay, so the most serious offenses are violent incident with injury, no injury, weapons possession, drug-related offenses. Defiance only is no longer a thing. However, it is still on this metric because this chart includes data from a time when it was still a thing, and then there's nothing. Okay. What you'll find is that in most instances, the district's rate of suspensions or the number of suspensions for these most serious offenses has gone down, and has gone down since pandemic. However, overall, there's a 43% increase in overall suspensions, and that comes primarily from a 96% increase in violent incident without injury. Okay. I will go out on a limb and say I don't think that that stems all of a sudden you had 200 more fights without injury or the suspensions. Sometimes this happens because of attention to detail and the reporting is now streamlined or has been made easier, or there's a new SIS system or a new director of student services or new training for teachers and or site staff. So again, something to look into. There's I would not put a bunch of eggs in the all of a sudden there's more violent incidents on campus, but again, something to kind of look at further. One thing that we do look at is we look also at principal turnover. Okay, how many faces, leadership faces, does a site get to see or has seen over the course of the last 5 years? And board, just really quickly, just note number 2, and for the public, number 2, we had it as 2. It was a typo. It should be 1. So Cherry, is it right? It's now it's correct on the public view, but on yours, the printed version, it says Cherry Chase had 2 administrators. It's 1. Okay, so if you want to cross that out and fix it, it's correct on the screen now. Generally speaking, principal turnover can destabilize initiatives, it can weaken school culture, it makes everything else more difficult, and it is a multiplier for those things that schools that are more vulnerable than others. So the higher the vulnerability of the school, the more impactful, either both positively and negatively, is stable or destable leadership. So over the course of the last 5 years, Bishop and Cherry Chase have had just a singular principal face, Cumberland 2, Ellis 2, and it's a 1s and 2s all the way down to get to Sunnyvale Middle that's had 3 over the course of the last 5 years. Again, just something to look at. Every time that there's a new face, it's new onboarding, it's new initiatives, it's new direction. And so having a way from a district perspective to provide, to backfill and to provide stability in any initiative, it's really important to have a plan for that when leadership does turn over. Level 3 is college and career readiness. So the preview of that is that opportunities for student success in college and career is could be limited for some because of depressed outcomes, achievement outcomes. In many cases, earned grades of 4 or 3 in coursework don't match earned proficiency on SBAC with the least connection in math. And then lack of access to accelerated math pathways can affect advanced course placement in high school and limit either college or career readiness and competitiveness in both of those arenas. So we'll look at that together. We try to do traditional DF rate analysis. However, middle schools here operate off a different grading scale, right? There's a 4-point grading rubric, 3 metrics of 1, students earning a 1, a 2, or a 3. It's not met the standard, partially met the standard, or nearly met the standard. The metric of 4 means that they met the standard. Okay, so not a traditional grading system for middle school. So we'll do our best. Okay. So what we ended up doing is that at middle school number 1, we had these are the grades, the total marks that were given. This is end of year trimester, so try 3 for the 24-25 school year. And long story short, the predominant grade that are given are fours, right? Students are earning a lot of fours as compared to the other grades, followed by threes, and almost no one's earning a one. Okay, so fours and threes wind up being the majority of grades given in both 7th grade and 8th grade at middle school 1, and the story is the same at middle school 2. Okay, fours and threes are primary grades given. Hardly anyone gets a 1, and most students are, in that case, passing their classes. So then what we look at is we look for, that was looking at kind of like an A and B, the equivalent of an A and B perspective. So now we'll look at those students that are earning 1s and 2s. Okay, so for 7th grade at middle school and 8th grade middle school, number 1, anything that is over 30% is highlighted in red. And so what you'll have is that 41% and 46% for 7th graders that are long-term English learners and students on an IEP. And same thing for 8th grade in the subject of English. No elevated 1s and 2s for math and science for any group above the 30-point threshold. And then social science for 7th grade English learners with less than 3 years in U.S. schools and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. And then for 8th graders, those students identifying as Hispanic, long-term ELs, those with an IEP, and socioeconomically disadvantaged. At middle school 2, now we have, not for 7th grade, but for 8th grade, you start to have more 1s and 2s for earned in both math and science for those similar groups. Students identifying as Hispanic, ELs of 3 years or less, ELs of 6 years or more, those students on an IEP, and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. For language arts and for social science, it is long-term ELs and those identifying as Hispanic or Latino for 7th grade, long-term ELs and ELs in general for 8th grade. So then, you see we keep peeling back layers of the onion, right? So those are the grades earned / given at each individual school. So then what we do, and this is at middle school number 1, we want to see, well, how close are those grades that are given, how close do they match to proficiency at the end of year state exams, right? So in this case, SBAC. And so this was SBAC scores as compared to final grades for 7th and 8th graders at middle school 1 for English and for math. And the way we read it is at the bottom here, the black numbers, that is the grade that was earned in coursework. So the students that earned a 4 are in this band of data. Students that earned a 3 are in this band of data, and so on. A 2 and a 1. The columns are how they either met or exceeded standards on the end of year assessment by the state. Okay, so it's exceeded standards, met standards, nearly met, or not met. And what we found is that 49% of students who earned a 3 or a 4 in their English class also earned standards met or higher on the end of year assessment, which means 51% of kids that got a 3 or 4 did not, quote unquote, pass the SBAC, right? The end of year assessment given by the state. That was for language, for ELA at middle school 1. For math, the number was a tad lower at 44%. So for students that are earning both 4s and 3s in their coursework, there wasn't an exact match between grading and state metric of success at the end of the year. Ma'am.
Let me ask a question. I'm just gonna ask a question from Dr. Crossley. Can you just tell me, because my understanding is that a 4 for our grading system means met standard, so that's the equivalent of like a C, right? And so a 3 would actually be like a 60, it can go as low as like a 62%. Is that still correct? Because what that means is that, you know, in our mind's eye, we're thinking a 4 would be like A, B, C, D. But I think we talked about this in a previous board meeting where our 3 actually goes quite low, and it actually starts kind of low. So like it would not surprise me if people in the 3 category, it actually makes me kind of happy that some of them exceeded and met right? Because on the standardized test, because when we were giving them a grade, we were giving them a grade that's really below a C and possibly as low as a D minus.
Yes, so there is a discrepancy between our SIS system, we're using PowerSchool, and the grading that we have here. So the PowerSchool, I believe, is a 5-point scale.
It's kind of an ill-fitting tool when we're utilizing standards-based grading, so.
So it's not aligned to this, and so that's a separate issue, so we have to revisit PowerSchool and recalibrate with our number grading system. And then separately, it's the alignment with the state test as well.
Right, because I've talked to a couple of teachers and they said, I can give a student who has like a 60th percentile, I can give them a 3. Like I don't have to give them a 2, but it's not really communicating that much. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Absolutely. We did the similar analysis for middle school number 2, and where it was 49 and 44 previously. At the middle school number 2, it's the same metric, but it's 77% of students who received a 4 or a 3 in ELA met or exceeded standards in language arts or English, and then in this case for math, it was 70% that earned a 4 or a 3 that were either met or exceeded on SBAC. The key part here, I wanted to look at some EL numbers, English language learner numbers specifically at the middle school, because I think it tells an interesting story around reclassification processes when students enter your middle schools, and it tells a good story. Columbia Middle School in that most recent year had 198 English language learners. Sunnyvale Middle had 188 English language learners on campus. That's almost 400 kids, okay, that came to them and are on their campus as a current English language learner. Reclassification, the goal for that is for students to reclassify by their 5th year in U.S. schools so that they stay on track. What's interesting is that when you start to look at the reclassification numbers, if you picture this, and it's not apples to apples because this cohort happened at the exact same time, so it's not the exact same kids, but having almost 400 ELs in the 24-25 school year at the middle school, and only having sent 98 on to high school, that's 300 of the 400, potentially 300 of 400 kids were reclassified while in middle school, which it doesn't happen all the time. Oftentimes you'll see the reclassification rates once they hit middle school wind up being very flat, generally speaking. In this case, there were roughly 400 students that were ELs on the campus. You only sent out 98 onto the high school. Of the 98 you sent onto the high school, 52 of them were long-term English language learners. However, 26 of the 52 were also on an IEP, right? So they had extenuating circumstances. So really, that number is 26 kind of pure, English language learners without any extra supports. Which, when you start with 400, that's a really good number, and that's something to be commended. That's good work. When looking at 1 year's growth for English language learners, we look at it in terms of stair steps. So on the left-hand side here on the data, we have years in U.S. schools. Across the top, we have LPAC levels, which is the state assessment for English language proficiency. You have to have at least passed that, plus some local metrics to reclassify or to redesignate. Okay. So the way that we read this is that in their first year of U.S. schools, technically that would be year 0, because they would be currently in it. You would expect kiddos to score a 1 on LPAC. In their second year of U.S. schools, you expect them to score a 2, roughly, and then a 3, and then a 4, provided they stay on their 1-year trajectory. There's a yellow buffer zone, so if they fall, a year or a year and a half behind, half a year or a year behind, they're still in that on-track metric. So of all the ELs in the district, between 20 English learners in the district, 24-25 school year, 73% of them were on track to make 1 year's growth in that 1 year growth trajectory. 27% were on watch. Now, on watch just means be mindful of them. They may need a little something extra or different, but they're not necessarily keeping pace with the 1-year trajectory. Now, in the red rectangle here, I highlight these in particular, because this is a special group. These 235 kids, when we pulled data, had already passed the state's requirement for reclassification. The state-only requirement, meaning that there are other local requirements, is that they score a 4 on LPAC, right? They have to have a 4, an overall score of 4. There were 235 students that did. However, they're not yet in the reclassified bucket, right? Which means they either hadn't gone through the process yet, or they're not meeting a local measure. Both things are possible based on the time that we pulled data, based on the processes that happen in the district. So we say, hey, 235 kids, that's a humongous group. So to analyze a little bit further and go a little bit deeper and say, well, is it because they hadn't gone through the process yet, and maybe they are now, meaning have already reclassified, or is it that they're not meeting a local measure? And I think one of the other local measures is the NWEA, the MAP assessments that may be used as another local measure for data. So again, just something to keep an eye on, and that's a huge. To me, it's a great problem to have, close to 250 kiddos that have already met the state's requirement, because that is not an easy assessment, for sure. We take just a brief glance at the dual language program at San Miguel. Really, we want to look at it in 2 different ways. One, from how long are what is the persistence rate of students within the system? How long are they sticking around for their 5 years in the program? And so we looked at cohorts 2020 to 2021 school year. The class 1 of a kindergarten cohort that started the dual language program started with 19 students. That was 8 English language learners, 10 students that were English only, and 1 initially fluent student. That is textbook makeup of a dual language program. And over the course of the 5 years, 84% persistence rate. Okay, so students stayed within the program. All but 3 left the program. When you look at cohort number 2,
Stayed, all but 3.
what did I say? I apologize.
Yes. 3 left, yeah.
I meant to have it be a good thing, right? They stayed. They stayed. Only 3 left. Thank you for that. And then the second cohort, class number 2, 21 students started initially. That is 11 English language learners, 9 students that are English only, 1 initially fluent student. And of the 21 that started, 19 finished, right? So that's a persistence rate of 90%. Okay, so the program itself, because it starts with the correct makeup and is supportive along the way, that students are staying within that program for the long haul. What happens when they go to middle school is that there is no middle school dual language program. However, there's a dual language pathway, we kind of call it, and that's when they go to Columbia. They take Heritage Spanish Speaking 2. Of those students at Columbia that take that course, 27 students were from the dual language program at San Miguel. Okay. One thing that we'll call attention to is that, and we'll get into a little bit deeper dive into it in a minute. Regardless of final grade here, so we have final grades of 2 and 1 and 3 based on, those are student grades. They all received on paper a Met UC A through G requirement, okay? So, but with the current scoring and the current rubric scored grades, A through G requirements require a letter grade of C or higher. So just from a data entry perspective, that course is not officially eligible for A through G requirements, at least from a grading perspective. That is also on top of, did it get validated by by Doorways, UC Doorways as a eligible class and those types of things. We'll get into that a little bit deeper in a second, because that rears its head a little bit when we're talking about Algebra 1 and geometry also at the middle schools, okay? This is just a little bit about dual language pathway. Again, if in terms of outcomes, levels 3 and 4, that is proficiency on SBAC. So the students that participated in the DLI program that went into Columbia met and or exceeded standards at a 36.4% clip, the identical number for math, and students that were not dual language at 34.9% in language arts and 39.5% in math, so kind of an even match. And then these are grades earned, so grades of 3 and 4. Those students who were in the DLI program received grades of 3 or 4 at a 60% clip, whereas those students that were non-DLI program received 3s and 4s at only a 46% clip. So DLI students were about 14 percentage points higher in earning grades of 3 or 4 in that coursework. This is just a summary of the last hour of things I talked about. So it's just listed there as kind of in a nutshell.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just a clarifying question. So you're saying on that last slide that students who were in the dual language program, this is just at Columbia, who they both received similar levels of proficiency, whether they were in the program or not,
Yeah, and so,
on the state tests.
yes.
But in terms of grading, they received higher.
Yeah, so
grades.
the tolerance between state level outcomes was really close. It was like 36% to 34 and 36 to 39, and really the dual language and non-dual language flip-flopped, English and math. One was higher than the other one by almost identical amounts. But in terms of the grades earned of 3 or 4, the students that participated in the dual language program were about 14, they received 14% more 3s and 4s as the non-dual language students did, from a grading, like a report card grading perspective.
Is that in English and math?
It is.
Thank you.
Summary. So now we start talking about what systems best explain the profile. You're gonna start to see pie charts. Anywhere you see a pie chart, that means we asked a question of someone, whether through, in this case, the surveys, but we also asked similar questions during our interview process. You'll also see in subsequent slides that there are some quotes associated with some of the questions. Please know that this process is and will always remain anonymous and confidential. The only way that a quote winds up in the presentation is if it is indicative of a theme and would have had to have been said 5 or 6 or 7 times through the course of looking at the data, and so that the expectation of there being outliers or people that are individually identifiable by their quote doesn't exist. Okay, so we're very, that's something that's very near and dear to our hearts, and we take that very seriously. So please know that the quotes are not, they're just indicative of a theme. The question we asked here, in your estimation, how many students do you believe can successfully graduate UC or CSU eligible, right? That's A through G requirements. 46% of staff responded, said either all or most. Okay, 30% said many, 20% said some, and 4% said very few. Okay? I forgot to start with the end in mind. This is 368 survey results we received back. That's 18 administrators, 16 counselors, 88 support staff, which is classified staff, and then 246 certificated teaching staff. Okay. The second question we asked was, in your estimation, how many parents or guardians want their child to attend a university upon graduation? 55% said all or most, 31% said many, 13% said some, and 1% said very few. We also asked about the culture of high expectations, right? Does your school have a strong college or high wage career going culture, right? 36% said most definitely. We asked about the district. Does the district have a strong college or high wage career going culture? And the response most definitely was 30%. And then how would you describe the current state of achievement at your school in particular? 28% said high performing, 19% said low performing, and 53% said average. Okay. Now again, I'm not going to read all the quotes to you because we'll be here through tomorrow. However, just know the gist is that that there is an acknowledgement in the quotes that we could do kind of a better job of at the elementary level focusing on college and career aspirations, and that some are doing it more robustly than others. And the general consensus is that that is based up on site, is dependent by site, not necessarily a system that is district-wide. Okay. The remaining findings and recommendations are gonna fall into four major buckets. Symbolic data systems, weak program design, new tracking, and then weak systems alignment. Okay, so I'll go into each of these in detail as we get there, so I'm not gonna explain each one in individual right now, but you'll see as we go. Okay, so starting off with symbolic data systems. Again, a preview. In most cases, curricular pieces are driving instruction, not standards. Okay, that doesn't mean that standards are absent from the conversation. Teachers, administrators are having conversations around standards. There are learning objectives, there are language objectives, there are I can statements all over the place in most of your classrooms. However, when it gets down to the work that students are doing, it is largely either the adopted curriculum or supplemental materials that are driving a lot of that, and they may or may not be at the correct level of rigor for the grade level, even if they are lined up with the appropriate standard, right? Because of calibration, we'll get into that. Weak calibration of the floor and grade level core instructional expectations as defined by SBAC. In most cases, common assessments are monitoring development, progress on developmental skills rather than mastery of grade level agreements and or chunks of instructional targets. And then PLC or data teams is/are an emerging practice where teachers and teams are getting together to have instructional responses around standards and skills that they are assessing in common. And this is a fantastic practice. However, it varies greatly by site. You know, how often, what is the focus, how many standards, what is the metric, how hard is hard enough? So the idea that this process is only as strong as the teams are at the site. And so what you find is that some are doing an amazing job. And it's robust and it's exactly what it should be. Everyone is trying, however. There are some that are still learning the process. But there's little from a system perspective that would level the expectations across sites. That really lands within teacher teams, not a system. Okay? So teachers have data at their fingertips. They have the common assessment, however, that is used in the district is NWEA, right, or the MAP assessments. Okay? Not good, not bad, just it is what it is. However, from a formative perspective of making instructional decisions in real time using that data, it's probably not the best data to use for that purpose, right? It identifies gaps. It measures those gaps over the course of time, but there are several instances where it doesn't, teachers can't backward map from it, so oftentimes it does not assess what teachers just taught. It also doesn't necessarily align with the way and the ways that checking for understanding happens at the state level for the given grade level's rigor, so you may get false negatives or false positives, and it's just really hard to translate into action. But teachers are doing so. They're trying their dangest, and they're also leveling on top of that their own common formative assessments when this one might not scratch that itch, to use a less than formal term. So it really doesn't lend itself to those formative conversations, to instructional agreements that assess how students learn what teachers intended to teach. It does answer those questions, like I mentioned, kind of what are those diagnosed learning gaps? And also, did students grow in some way? That's exactly what it does. Because the scores that come back are in RIT, there are what are called RIT scores, there are quantiles, there are how much did you improve over last time. But if the assessment wasn't dialed into what you taught last time, then the growth after that winds up being haphazard, right? It's ambient growth. It's did they learn while they were in your presence, not did they learn what you taught. A big difference. So those most helpful questions from a data team, whether it's PLC or data teams, is what's the grade level floor of expectations during this next chunk of time? under what conditions, or what conditions are necessary for students to learn and to pick up what I'm putting down, to learn what I'm teaching. How well did they learn what I taught? And if they didn't learn what I taught, what is my next step now? What do I go back and do? Where did they miss, and how do I cycle back and revisit that learning? NWEA and the MAP assessments make it really difficult to have those conversations. So what teachers are doing now is they're coming up with their own. Some grade levels have fantastic processes and they make great assessments. Others are making assessments, when I say great, meaning aligned to outside sets of rigor. And then some are coming up with, again, common formative assessments. They're just not necessarily calibrated from team to team, to site to site. And so it makes it difficult to know if I have cousins that go to 2 different schools, are they getting the same, do they have the same academic floor, right? The same expectation based on grade level. So we asked teachers, do you use data to inform your practices in the classroom? And 84% said most definitely, and they do. We asked, do you use it as a department or grade level? 70% said most definitely. We asked, does your school have a strong culture of using data to inform its own decisions? And 63% said most definitely. So they are data drenched, right? They have their own data. They have, the common assessment data. They have data from their own adopted curriculums and chapter tests and quizzes that they give. So it's not a lack of data, but is it actionable? And is it calibrated to the proper rigor? Is it the right hard? Is it the right level of rigor? There are also pieces that teachers go through in terms of planning that guide these data teams and these PLCs that are the right answer, right? It's asking the right questions. The issue isn't having a place for these conversations to land. It's that does the data facilitate actionable next steps that are calibrated amongst teams? And that answer is, it depends on the strength of the team, right? It varies by grade level to grade level, even within a site. We asked about collaboration time. How often do you meet with your colleagues, your teacher teams? 52% more than once a week. Every week, once a week on the dot is 24%. So roughly 80% of teachers that are meeting with each other at least weekly. And we asked them, is that time impactful to you? Is it meaningful to you? 75% said very meaningful. These quotes are just some things that they say that they do during those times. So in terms of program design, in this case, week program design, although California standards are evident in most planning documents, most instruction is still guided by those curricular pieces, and what is assessed in common is not always the same as what is taught. And we kind of talked about that in the previous bucket. Designated ELD, so English language development is evident on most sites' master schedules. It's visible as a practice in some classes, but when we did see it, it was largely focused on individualized skills, almost like LPAC prep, right? A very isolated, skills-based instruction. The sweet spot for ELD instruction is really rooted in grade level and with a heavy dose of vocabulary and oral language along the way. Picture it like the designated ELD sections should prepare students for their core English part of their day, right? So either as a preview, like I'm gonna ramp you up to what's coming, or I'm gonna dial back in and solidify the learning that you could have and should have gotten during the core. Like I said, with heavy doses of oral practice. The differentiation of instruction based on data is largely remediation and oftentimes is reserved for out of classroom intervention rather than formative first instruction, right? A lot of it is farmed out, whether it's an extra adult or whether it's an interventionist or a coach or something that is not part of regular first instruction. The most appropriate place for having those common instructional agreements are for first instruction. Opportunities for intervention, including win time and I think it's AST, the middle school, are inconsistently structured from site to site and loosely tied to core content. And that just means that there's also limited impact. So if you're measuring how students learn core content, but those extra times aren't necessarily rooted in grade level core content, they won't match, right? You're not gonna go home any less exhausted. However, the outcomes won't be what you expect because that wasn't the focus of the time to begin with. Okay. So again, if you picture a theme here, has nothing to do with the hardworking nature of staff on campus, in terms of teachers, admin, support staff, paras, but it's about the system in which they're working in. Doesn't necessarily connect the dots from class to class, grade to grade, and especially site to site. There would be some way more efficient ways to kind of get after it. Okay. Pulled up just some examples. These are some things, not an end all be all, but just some samples of student work that students were going elementary specifically, grades 3, 4, and 5. Again, if you were to ask me, they are absolutely related to the grade level standard. The question, however, is that calibrated with rigor in mind, right? Is this the right hard for 3rd grade? Is it the right hard for 4th grade? And oftentimes it's not. But that varies again from site to site. Is there something in the fabric of the district that calibrates how hard is hard enough? Have they had the conversations? Are those rounds of discussions so that we're all in the loop of what the academic floor is? And without having those happen, then you're going to get variance from either class to class or team to team because they're left to plan and to interpret on their own. And I'm thankful that they are. And they're, like I said, it doesn't come from a place of lack of effort, but maybe sometimes a lack of structure. We asked, this one is a little more telling about that same conversation. We asked teachers, if you were a new teacher to the school, would you specifically know what you're responsible to teach? 57% said most definitely. Right, so just over half. And then we asked if you were a new teacher, would it be clear the level of rigor that's expected? Which means, do you know how hard is hard enough at 4th grade, 5th grade, whatever your grade level is? 42% said most definitely. And then we asked, is there agreement around teachers that teach either the same subject or the same course around what grading means? Is your A my A? Is my 4 your 4? And only 50% said most definitely that they're in agreement with their colleagues and peers. Okay. So again, there's room for alignment, room for conversations around what does that mean collectively through teacher teams and then ultimately from a district system perspective. ELD instruction, these are just some of the comments and quotes around ELD instruction. Some of them are around not having an ELD curriculum. Some of them talk about not really having a program, except for that of newcomers. Teachers are doing what they can, we grab what we can. And it just being evident of if nothing else, a perceived lack of systems around what English language development looks like at the site level. So here's where we started to get some more of those, the limitations of the standard-based grading in middle school. So it does affect Algebra 1 geometry and language other than English. So what you have is it's twofold. One, that you have students in the math courses that are receiving through CalPADS, UC or CSU A through G, having met that requirement, even though they don't have the proper letter grade to warrant them having met that requirement. Now in math, both math courses, it's different than the language course because at least these, you had to get a 4 or a 3. In the Heritage Spanish 2 class, it was any grade got the check mark for having received the A through G credit. So there's the bookkeeping side of it. But the other side of it is that you have students that are passing foreign language in your system. You have students that are passing Algebra 1. You have students that are passing geometry. And because of the grading situation, when they go to high school, those courses don't count towards their A through G satisfaction of the 3-year minimum math and the 4-year minimum, you know, those A through G requirements. So if a student passed algebra or geometry at the middle school, and for some reason struggled in high school, something happened in the family, you know, all kinds of things can happen, and they only met 2 years of A through G math at high school, the algebra year they passed at the middle school wouldn't count towards that A through G. So technically, they would be ineligible for the A through G requirements for Cal State and CSU, or Cal State and UC. Okay. And again, that affects algebra, geometry, and language other than English. So one of it is, so there will be some findings and recommendations around that part. But really, it's not just a misalignment of paperwork. It can have disastrous impacts on students later on, probably at the most crucial time. Because those are things that you don't usually discover until it's too late. Again, we talked about this briefly before, but it's the same thing for the Heritage Spanish 2 class. And again, it's not with just 3s and 4s, it's 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s, where students receive the A through G credit within the coursework. The caveat to that is on top of all of that, it is predicated that the courses would have to be approved through UC doorways, right? So that is the extra thing. So they have to be both approved by the state, and then they have to receive a letter grade of C or higher in those courses. I don't want to sell the approval part short. New tracking. Okay, so there has been tracking in higher level math courses at the middle school. The gap compounds every year, and it's really, once you get into a track, it's nearly impossible to get out of that track. And then not only that, but underserved students are also simultaneously being enrolled in non-academic courses at disproportionate levels too. So we'll look at that together. So this is 6th grade math. It's all 6th grade math, and it is combined at both sites. So you have 6th grade math, regular math. And so I left it here. I had to come up with my own nicknames for these to keep them straight. You have math 6-7. It's also a 6th grade math course, but it is accelerated. You have then math 7-8, which is also a 6th grade math course. I'm calling it 6th grade accelerated plus. And I had to do that just so I can keep the enrollment straight, okay? These are all 6th grade math classes. When you look at the general 6th grade math, and then the way that we read these charts is this equilibrium line. The line right down the middle is total enrollment of student population at the schools, okay? So if you had 29% English language learners at your school and they were 29% enrolled in one of those classes, there would be no red line, there would be no blue line, it would be no line, because their enrollment in the course matches their enrollment at the school. This goes to show, and so if you have blue, you're over-enrolled based on the part of the population slide that you take, the total enrollment slide that you take up. And if it's red, it's under-enrolled, okay, based on the amount of that you take up in terms of student population. So in this case, for basic 6th grade math, English language learners, students identifying as Hispanic and Latino, and those that are socioeconomically disadvantaged are disproportionately enrolled in those classes to the tune of 19.7%, 20.6%, and 14.5%. Those that are under-enrolled in those classes are English-only students at minus 10.2%, and not socioeconomically disadvantaged kids at 14.6%. Then you take it the next level of acceleration. Okay, and so now the opposite is true. So we were looking before at students that were overrepresented in basic math are now underrepresented in the first tier of advanced math. Those underrepresented are English learners, students identifying as Hispanic, Latino, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and those students on an IEP to the tune of 16, 21, 17, and 16%. Those that are disproportionately represented in the positive way are English only and students non-socioeconomically disadvantaged. And by the time you get to the most accelerated 6th grade math, the only group that is disproportionately enrolled in those courses are the non-socioeconomically disadvantaged kids at 20.4% exceeding their enrollment on the site. Okay. Everyone else is under enrolled. Okay. In seventh grade, the problem starts to compound, right? So you have your seventh grade basic math course, over enrollment at 25, 27, and 26% for ELs, students Hispanic or Latino and socioeconomically disadvantaged. Almost 30% under enrollment for students that are not socioeconomically disadvantaged, and for English only kiddos. When you get to the second level of acceleration in seventh grade math, the only group that is out enrolled beyond their percent is not socioeconomically disadvantaged kids at 14%. And then algebra 1 at seventh grade is everyone is underrepresented except for more affluent students at 22.7%. Not over enrollment, but disproportionate enrollment based on their number of the population. So the final piece is that eighth grade math. Okay, so you have eighth grade math, basic eighth grade math. So now you have English learners, students identifying as Hispanic, Latino, and those socioeconomically disadvantaged at 18%, 28%, and 13%. The only group that's under enrolled are those more affluent students. Algebra 1. The only students that have disproportionate positive enrollment are English onlys and more affluent students, and then geometry, it's 21.6% disproportionate enrollment for those students who are more affluent, those that are not socioeconomically disadvantaged. So the underrepresented group pathway starts in sixth grade, and there's very little that can be done from a student perspective to get out of that track once you're on it. There are very few off-ramps for that, or the opposite, on-ramps back to an accelerated track. All happening at the same time, you have a disproportionate share of non-academic classes assigned to students who are those same students that are underrepresented in advanced math track. They're not being placed in non-academic classes in lieu of advanced math. They just happen to be the same kids. So you have teacher's aide, seventh grade, teacher's aide, eighth grade, office grade, seventh grade, office aide, eighth grade. And in every single instance, those students that are overrepresented tend to be your English language learners and your socioeconomically disadvantaged and students on an IEP. The one common thread through all of those non-academic courses is that the only ones that are underrepresented by the slice of pie they take up are those more affluent, socioeconomically advantaged kids. They're the only ones that are consistently not in those classes at rates that are far below their slice of the enrollment pie. So not only are they being underserved that our students are being underserved in an advanced math pathway perspective, but at the same time, they're being overrepresented in non-academic classes also. I'll tell you a quick story. This is broad strokes, but I think it's really impactful. So I want you to picture 100, and it's really foundational to the idea that pre-A through G and academic rigor and the push for alignment at the youngest of ages is really important for kiddos. So if you take 100 graduates out of any system, let's just call it out of the Sunnyvale area. If they go to Foothill College, okay? Foothill College has a 2-year transfer rate of 11%, okay? Not an AA track, not a 3-year track, 2-year transfer to a 4-year university at 11%. So of those original 100 graduates, if they were only 11 would transfer to a 4-year university. If those 11 kids go straight to San Jose State, that has a transfer grad rate of 83%, of the original 100 kids, you're gonna get 9 college degrees at the end. Right? 9 out of the original 100. If those same 100 graduates just went straight to San Jose State at a 62% grad rate for first-time freshmen, you're getting 62 on the other side having bachelor's degrees. Okay? Yes, it is broad strokes. Is it a perfect match? No. But what it does do is it sets the stage for why the push for academic equity early, right? Because it should be every kid's option to go, and this is not to poo-poo JC or community college, but it should be a kid's option based on life circumstances where they go. Is it a 4-year? Is it community college? Is it the family business? Is it trade school? Is it military? Those are the options that are afforded to students who have every life option available to them, made possible by the most robust academic program at their schools, starting in TK, right? Starting in kinder. I'll get off my soapbox way, but that's what this says. No matter what they choose, the goal of any educational institution is to make sure students have every life option available to them at the end of their time with you. Again, just real quick, the staff reflection on professional development. Does it impact your practice? Only 25% said most definitely. Largely, it has lately and recently, it's been around curricular pieces. There's been a lot of, adoptions, and there's been a lot of PD around curriculum pieces. Not necessarily as impactful from a teacher's perspective, according to teachers. The last bucket is weak systems alignment. There's definitely a need for a clear, measurable strategic plan. Now, that is a plan that is strategic. It is not necessarily a strategic plan, but it's something that is grounded in an end metric. Where do you want all students to be 5 years from now? And having conversations with students and staff and families to say, you know what are our priorities and how do we get there? Also setting up the benchmarks for what does it look like in year 4? What does it look like in year 3? So that you can progress monitor along the way to see how close you are to getting to those established goals. Greater inclusion of teachers in system development and processes. Stronger support for their professional work, ensuring that teachers are trusted and heard and supported through the process. One thing that it was loud and clear, and it wasn't necessarily from a decision-making perspective, but staff on campus want to be involved. They think they know it's super important, and they're okay with the decisions sometimes not going their way, provided that the communication loop is closed for them. Just let us know the rationale of the decision, because we asked for input, and then we never heard back why. We just know that a rule was implemented, or for lack of a better term, a rule was implemented. So really establishing an inclusive process, inclusive of robust communication loop, and then a deep front loading of site administrators, right? The site administrators should be front loaded in all things instructional initiatives and behavioral initiatives, especially as they stand to be the primary support for their teacher teams on campus. And so investing in them from a front loading perspective is imperative so that teachers and staff get the support that they need on campus. So staff is experiencing some district level systems as top down and low trust and maybe misaligned. These are just some of the quotes. Again, didn't pick outliers. These have been kind of themes. Sometimes teachers feel like they're collecting data, but they don't really know where it goes. Sometimes they feel like the finger's pointed at them, or that they feel dismissed. There's a lack of trust. So those are all things that are kind of right now built into the fabric and how people on site are experiencing district systems. Things that are totally correctable, right? With some conversation and some mindful planning. So we're in our last section, and this is the recommendations. So what can be done to accelerate student success? They're going to fall in those same 4 buckets. Well, one, you have to establish the academic floor, right? So getting teacher teams together, and empowering them to create what we call an assessment matrix. It's not a scope and sequence, but it's the essential standards that they're choosing to check in on over the specific pieces of time. They also get together and create what those common formative assessments are to check in on those standards. The difference between that and what they're doing now is that those common formative assessments should be rooted in the same item type and item specification as the end of year assessments given by the state, so that the hoops that kids are jumping through at the end of the year are the same shape and size that they're jumping through in October and March and the whole time throughout the regular course of the year. The second part of a systems alignment is a nested data response system. So right now, teachers get together and they talk about student data, and in most instances, they're coming up with common instructional agreements for their kids. But at the same time, site leadership should be looking at those agreements and the data, and then having site leadership conversations of how they support teachers, while teachers are supporting the kids with said formative agreements. Bring it up one level further. At the same time, the district folks should be looking from their seat to say, how do we support sites who are supporting teachers, who are supporting kids, all at the same time? And once you get all of those things rolling in the same direction at the same time, that's where magic happens. And it's just about establishing a system that looks at data that way, much less like nested dolls, same time, same place, but with the exit ticket for each of those sessions being common agreements of what the next steps look like for a very finite period of time. For program design perspective, level 2 of that program design is just that. It's establishing the alignment, that it's teacher curated cluster of essential standards, teacher created, teacher influenced assessments to gauge mastery. Level 3 is making differentiated instruction a part of regular core lesson design, not something extra, not something that's farmed out to somebody else, or not something that happens after direct instruction is over, right? Also being mindful when planning differentiation of the increased need for the higher trajectory for the most vulnerable kids. Now remember, it's not, like I said, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's not students getting a higher trajectory at expense of others, but it's under what conditions would my most vulnerable kids make additional growth in the same period of time. Around designated ELD level 4 and 5, for non-newcomers, because newcomers, it is totally appropriate to have a program, a kit, like they just need down and dirty phonemic awareness, they need to learn how to read. That can happen in a very, well, if done the right way, in a very methodical, kit-based, program-based way. However, for all other students that are getting designated ELD, it's an opportunity to preview and review that grade level core content with an emphasis on vocabulary and oral language development so that it supports their participation in the regular English portions of their day, whether that is a course in middle school or whether that's the ELA portion of their direct instruction day at the elementary. It is most effective when students are grouped by English proficiency level during that time and that time only, if feasible based on the quantity of enrollment at the school. Sometimes there's not enough of a given group to be able to do that. And in that case, the answer is not grouping them by proficiency level all day, every day, right? That does more damage than it does good. Reconsider the instructional support staffing and service model to prioritize direct instructional support for teachers and students in the classroom, right? So think about extra adults that are in the system, whether they are TOSAs or coaches, the extra adults that are there to help and support teachers, finding ways for them to have more of a direct touch to actual in-classroom events, it's going to be highly important, especially when it's when in a system of alignment where you have teachers that are designated, these are our essential standards, this is how hard enough is. Leveraging those extra adults in real time can be very impactful if it's done mindfully. And then the last part is creating multiple opportunities for instruction by leveraging all parts of the day and the calendar. Before school, after school, winter break, summer, spring break, a ski week if you have one. All of those things are prime real estate to make sure that kids who need a higher trajectory get something extra and different. And if you can provide enrichment during the same time, great. Because remember, it's about everyone having access, but those that need it the most having a higher trajectory. The tracking, the recommendations around the tracking is providing open access, and options is providing open access to accelerated 6th grade math, where it is an opt-out rather than an opt-in. If everyone starts there and then you see what happens, right? Play the game as it comes to you. And also, not only is that their default enrollment, but there are also multiple entry points beyond 6th grade. So there's opportunities as 7th graders or 8th graders for students who may have fallen off of that path to get back to that path, and that that it's not a final decision once they fall off that path. Establish the district-wide pathway for math is a pathway to Algebra 1 for all kids by 8th grade. And like I said, including opportunities to enter and re-enter after their initial placement. Formalizing the articulation between course taking and grades with the high school districts. There has to be an understanding coming when they leave you that you know that it's a known commodity where they'll land when they go to high school. That is coupled with monitoring the progress of students, and it's coupled with cleaning up the A through G stuff, getting courses that need to be validated through pathways, and establishing potentially a grading system that gives students access to the credit they deserve for passing these courses within your system. And then the last one, last slide, weak system alignment. Again, it's around strategic planning, engaging families, staff, community partners, and creating a clearly articulated 3 to 5 year plan that backward maps from an articulated goal and has annual milestones, right? Something that is predictable, something that is owned by everybody, something that is just the fabric of how Sunnyvale rolls. Also cultivating a high functioning district leadership team that is making sure that any academic, instructional, or behavioral initiative that comes down is one that is messaged uniformly, that is firmly rooted in what that plan is, that stated strategic plan, and that ultimately the communication is very open and thorough, right? That's what maintains teacher ownership of initiatives and minimizes confusion. It's the shared leadership and understanding of not just the goals, but why they're the goals. Rallying around the why rather than the how. Also facilitating open and safe communication for all staff members, right? Having a way that everyone feels safe to provide their feedback and understanding while your culture building processes. And then building capacity of site and district administrators. One that is front loading all district level administrators with any initiative that comes down. And then the other thing is creating relationships between site administrators and district level staff, because site leadership is a lonely place sometimes, right? So principals need support as well. So by facilitating the deeper relationships between site administrators and their district level counterparts would go a long way in supporting those that we expect to support teachers. And that's a lot. I appreciate you guys very much. And again, there are some fantastic things going on in the district. And please know that where we have highlighted areas of potential needs for efficiencies, it doesn't mean that it's baby out with the bathwater, right? You have absolutely fantastic things that are happening in teacher teams and at sites and pockets. They just don't necessarily equate to a systems level approach. And so getting closer to a systems level approach would be a great thing. And I think would be welcomed by those that participated in the process.
Mr. McGuire, thank you so much for that presentation, and to you and your team, everyone that put in the work to get to this presentation. We have a lot ahead. Board, with your permission, I'd like to ask for a short bio break, and then we'll come back to public comment. So if that was an interest of yours, make sure you get your hand up or blueprints in. Thank you. The time is 7:46. We'll come back around 7:52 or so.
I heart
And then we won't have to do one person that can address, we can do sometimes different things also. We will kind of ask you questions.
I'm gonna try to do it right.
Yeah, everyone has a slightly different system.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. I'm the same. I'm just. So, yes, well. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of questions.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't shut up. Lovely. It's, I got to go Friday. There's a lot to understand. A lot of us, a lot of
Yeah, and just
I appreciate the presentation. I was not surprised. My mother. Second language. Back in the North Ages, where we were supposed to get. So many cultures.
I want to 99 do better.
Yeah, 99.
Yes, I guess, yeah. Yeah, you're the first percentile, so yeah. Great, 99 out of 100.
I appreciate start thinking what we got to do because some of these people are like, and other people are not. And I can expose.
Yes. Yes.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
There's a little bit of that, like.
Thanks for having Okay, the time is now 7:52 and we're bringing this meeting back to order. We'll be going into public comment. This portion of the agenda provides an opportunity for members of the public to directly address the governing board on any item of interest to the public. I'm sorry, this is the previous one. We are on a public comment on this specific agenda item, which is the only one. If you have a comment to make online, please raise your hand. And in person, make sure that I have one of your blue cards. Looks like we have 5 comments in the room. Are there any hands up?
One.
One, okay, so then we can do 3 minutes apiece. We will start off with Miss Katie Rowland, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Rowland, and I have 2 students in the Sunnyvale School District, a 3rd grader and a 7th grader, both in the Juntos program. First of all, I want to commend all of you for taking the investment in our children via Orenda. I know this was expensive, and I know this was time-consuming, and I find this whole process super validating. When I've come to you before and when I've asked things like, can you please look at the data and help us understand what would help our students succeed? This is a good example of what that looks like to me. So I really appreciate this report and the analysis. I had a couple of clarifying questions I was hoping to have answered through the course of the evening. One is, I was curious if you had access to the revised math pathways when you were doing your analysis regarding how students could access courses, have catch-up opportunities, bridge into those advanced levels. I strongly support removing all of the selective barriers to accelerated Math 6. I did want to clarify that means Math 6-7, not accelerating into 7-8 by default. So I just wanted to make that clarification or hear that clarification from you all. I'd like to hear how students would be supported in this new pathway. I'd be curious how implementation of this would look in grades 3 through 5. What do we need to do in grades 3 through 5 for our students to get there? If we drop the barriers tomorrow, what does success look like? Who is successful under those circumstances, or do we need to do more before we can adopt that approach? One of my other questions is, for other school districts who have done this, and I know there are at least 2 of you in this room who have participated in this process previously, how have you made sure that staff morale has remained maintained high, and stayed high? How have you kept staff motivated and engaged? So I think some staff members are going to hear this and be like, heck yes, I have been waiting for this my whole career. This is why I went into teaching. Like, I am stoked. And then you're going to have people who are like, I come in here every day and I'm doing like my school's at one, the 99% of the schools are above mine. So I'd love to hear what resources, encouragement, and examples we can give to our team to feel that these caring, motivated, compassionate, and wonderful people can actually do the right thing for our children. That's all.
Thank you, Thank you, Ms. Rowland. We will be moving on to Ms. Glenda Ortez Galan.
Hello, buenas tardes. I'm Glenda Ortez Galan. I have one son who's in a rising 6th grader in the Juntos program, and I have another student, a son who graduated last year and is now in high school. And I had so many thoughts before this presentation, and now I have other thoughts. And so I really just want to say I appreciate the time and investment that you've made in presenting this to us. But I do want to talk about my story of how when my son was 2 years old, this was 13 years ago, there was some information that came out in the media about how Black and Brown students were not being served in the Sunnyvale School District. And at that time, I feared, my husband and I feared, did we make the right choice in moving to Sunnyvale and settling here? Because it seems like there's certain groups that are thriving and others that are not thriving. And here we are in 2026, unfortunately. And hearing that and seeing and experiencing that the gaps are growing is concerning. And so I appreciate that in this report, there are some actionable items that can help support students and eliminate that gap. But I also just want to say that in my experience, what I feel has been a major barrier are the low expectations for my sons in this school district. So this has been, I'm sitting here listening to this data has been very difficult for me, but I think it's important for you to know that I'm a daughter of Salvadoran immigrants. I'm raising the 2nd generation Latino males that are both neurodivergent. And there have been situations where they've been thriving and some that where they have been barely surviving in this school district. And I am concerned about my son enrolling in middle school. I am. And I think it's important for you to know that fear is there. And I hope that that finally we see some systems change. I mentioned to my son that I was going to speak to the board, and I told him why. I think, why do you think that, that Latino students are falling behind, other groups, particularly Hawaiian Asian? And he said to me, I think it's because of racism. So, there it is. My 11-year-old told me that. So I just want us to sit with that. And again, I really hope that we start to see some change. I know it takes a long time, but I really hope that we start seeing, some progress for our students that are from underrepresented groups. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz Galan. We are moving on to Alex Calder.
Hello, my name is Alex Calder. I am the dad of a second grader in Juntos over at San Miguel. I'm going to recognize everybody here did request this report, and this is very important for us to understand. I feel like as a person adjacent to education, beyond my own mother and my wife for in excess of 40 years, there's a lot in there that feels like common sense to me because of how close I've been to it. My curiosity here is we have put a lot on the sites, and these ideas are things that need to happen. I see a lot of actionable items which are excellent, but this is a lot of weight on teachers, support staff, the offices, the principals. What are you guys all prepared to do? You, the system that we've placed in place, what are you prepared to do to support them? And that's it. I want to know about the support for those that are truly going to be executing this. And I will step down and take answers whenever.
Thank you, Mr. Calder. Next we have Ms. Kristen Federer.
Hello, I'm Kristen Fedorek. My daughter is also in the Juntos program in kindergarten. So I'm new to all of this from the board perspective, also new just to the education system in the United States. I did grow up here. We immigrated here, so a lot of learning as I go. So thank you to everyone who asked questions already ahead of me. I think my first train of thought is really I read this report and found out about it today, this afternoon. And so there's no information prior to why did you call this report? Obviously, I'm assuming there was a cataclysm that led to this and a need to get this done. Sounds like a massive undertaking, and so I thank you for doing that. But yeah, I think having an understanding as a parent as to why we decided to call for this report, and then kind of further into that, why did you choose the schools that you did to do the deep dive? Obviously, something must have stuck out to choose those schools, I'm assuming. So we'd love just to kind of have more information as a parent about this. Sorry, I'm trying to read my very messy handwriting. I think also as a board, next sort of hearing, what are the next steps? What are the plans? I'm hoping this report doesn't just sit there and nothing's done. I'd love to see what the next steps are to it. How do we as parents support, both the school as a whole, as our teachers, our children, to help move forward in those next steps? Sorry, I'm trying to read my writing again. I'd also love to hear the board perspective. Were you surprised by these results? Was this what you were expecting? What stood out to you? What did you expect? What didn't you expect? And sort of how do we move forward from that? So much around just the communication as a whole. And then as a parent from San Miguel, obviously San Miguel was called out in a couple different ways within this report. And I think as a school, obviously we're well supported here tonight. And so there's, I think, something special about that. But how do we look at that as a school? And then also at the moment in San Miguel, from my understanding, we are undergoing a curriculum change. And so I wanted to know how this report is impacting that curriculum and what, if any, does that change how we're looking and viewing and assessing the curriculums that we're going to choose. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fedoruk. Finally, in the room, we have Courtney Jensen.
Good evening, Courtney Jansen, parent of 2 kids in the Juntos program at San Miguel. I'm gonna also try and read my really bad handwriting here as I go through. So first of all, thank you. As has already been echoed, I know this was a lot of work. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate the in-depth detail, and I feel like I could sit with this data for like 7 more hours and still not fully have processed it. One thing, right, someone already mentioned you have lots of San Miguel parents here. It would have been really great to see more publication or publicizing of tonight's meeting across the community. This information is super important. I don't know how Public Orenda usually makes these reports, so I appreciate that the data is out here, but people have to know the data is out here in order to be able to use it. We get the wonderful Superintendent's Weekly message. It would be great, I'm gonna put you right on the spot and say it'd be great in the one next week to talk a little bit about some of the key takeaways as part of that, to again, make sure everyone knows that this is actually happening, because you're doing so much work, you're putting so much time into it, parents need to be aware. Second, I really want to emphasize the teachers need the support. Teachers are working super hard, as was noted in here, and I agree with the concerns that we don't want to negatively impact teacher morale, for lack of a better word, as we go through this. And I think that support is both meeting them and talking to them. It'd be great to see the superintendent and all of you in talking to teachers directly more often, as opposed to just talking to principals, but it's also materials. And I'll just share a very short example. I was talking to a teacher the other day who had to teach a lesson that needed dictionaries, and there were no dictionaries that she could use for her lesson. And it did not sound like this was a scheduling conflict, it just sounded like there were no dictionaries. And so it's both, you know, the emotional and the conversation support, making sure they have the materials that they need, make sure that they're clear on what expectations they have to happen or they need to get there. I also want to echo with the ELA, ELD, et cetera, pilot that's going on. I heard a lot of things about how we need to match the state curriculum in those tests. Let's please make sure that that presentation on the curriculum pilot talks about which curriculum does that so that we can start to move in that direction. And I think as you look at where you want to go from here, my ask is that you take these amazing recommendations and more, and you split them into very clear, what are the short and easy term things that you want to do, I don't know, over the summer and the next school year? What are the medium and longer term things so that parents have a very clear sense of what actionable items are not just happening, but when they are going to happen and how you will measure yourselves for success. The one other thing I will throw out here, I did not know what an aid course was. I've since learned more about that in the last, I don't know, half an hour. So I'd be super curious to learn more about that data and what is putting kids into aid courses and if that is really the right place for them to be. So again, thank you for doing this. This is super interesting, and I'll have more questions probably later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jansen. We are moving to online comments.
We have 2 hands up now.
Okay, that's fine. We're with them.
Gira Colacota. Go ahead, Gira.
Ms. Galacota, go ahead, please.
Are you able to hear me? Hello?
Yes, we got you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. My name is Gita Golakota. I am a parent of a third grader at Alice Elementary, and today I want to share my observations of the Orenda presentation that we have. First of all, thank you for this initiative of getting this assessment to get a bigger picture view of what's going on in the district. It would have been interesting to dig a little bit more of the reasons why the students with disabilities are not performing well. The report clearly shows that students with disabilities are among the lowest performing groups in both ELA and math, and the gap is not closing. This points to a systems issue and not a student issue, and I loved how you pointed out to focus on the why rather than how. We've been trying to, it feels to me that the district has been trying to do several different things without actually looking into what could be the issues rather than it's increasing the spending for the district. So I'm really concerned about that. One concern that I have is that, the students with disabilities, when they're in SDC classrooms are in the general ed classrooms, the gap with the academic levels, the way the special ed education department measures for IEPs are they should be 2 grades below or 2 standard deviations below. That means that kids need to be 7 percentile or below for them to get access to services in a particular area. That is really ridiculous because you are really leaving the core gap where it could have made a difference for them to function or thrive well in the middle school. So I would urge you to look at more deeply into how these IEPs are being constructed or how these kids needs visibly extensive needs, not extensive needs kids, but like extensive gaps that exist in kids in general education or even in SSC classrooms to be viewed at. So that's my only request, and I do hope that this report's takeaways are taken seriously by the district, and we could see some changes. And I also echo with the previous commenters that a letter to the parents would be a nice way to explain the understandings that have been brought about from this presentation from the district administration. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Golicoto. One more online commenter.
We have Susan Sala.
Ms. Sala, go ahead with your comment, please.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Salop, and I'm a parent of an alumnus from Sunnyvale School District who is now a student at Fremont Union High School District. And I'm a bit of a data geek, so I kind of look at the data a lot from both Sunnyvale School District and Fremont Union High School District. And the presentation today was very interesting, and it's really, this Orinda presentation is consistent with the data I found in the high school district reports that we see at board meetings, LCAP, all that stuff. With the exception of a small number of students in special education classes at Fremont Union High School District, it's probably about 3 or 4%. Most students at Fremont Union High School District, 96, 97%, are taking or are eligible to be taking A to G classes. So despite this high percentage of Fremont Union High School District students who are in or eligible for A to G classes, certain student groups are not graduating with A to G requirements comparable with their peers, which was also discussed today. So one example, which is data in the Fremont Union High School District board meeting for tomorrow, Homestead High School, where many Sunnyvale School District students go, only 24% of English learners, 32% of Hispanic Latino students, and 26% of students with disabilities graduated with A to G classes in 24-25. And some potential causes of this, some of them came up in the Orinda report, and just some that I've thought of or noticed. Number one, a lot of students aren't getting C or above in these classes. Number two, students stop taking A to G classes after meeting graduation requirements. For example, they'll stop taking math after they take algebra and geometry. Number three, this whole idea around low expectations, where kids are kind of pushed to graduate but not to do A to G classes. Number four, students and families don't understand enough how the system works. For example, you can do makeup work to get above a C in these classes. A lot of times they don't know, or they're not given opportunities to know. Number five, they have challenging environments outside of school, socioeconomic, immigration, risk, etc. Number six, mental health challenges. And then number seven, students start high school with a lower baseline. And there's probably more, but that's just a short list I came up with. So many of these issues are overlapping. But there are so many areas that Sunnyvale School District and Fremont Union High School District can help improve the educational outcomes for these students. And I hope the findings from the Orinda report and then the why that's studied coming out of this will help kickstart these efforts and just help all these kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Sala, and thank you to everybody in the room as well as the 2 online commenters for being here, for being present and engaged in asking these questions and part of this conversation. We're moving on to a board discussion, and before we kick to the board, I would like to ask Dr. Crossway, how did we get here? Why did we embark on this study?
Yes, great question. Well, this is part of your request. Me coming in as a new superintendent from the outside. There were some things that I started noticing that just made me ask some additional questions. And I know that you have been asking questions about disaggregating data and better understanding the disparities and the inequities that we were seeing in the student outcomes. And so as a result of those conversations, this led to, hey, can we partner with somebody else who can help us dig deeper and better understand our data and give us a better sense of what this means for us as a district? Because from my, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, but the leadership team here is not satisfied with our current results. And so if we're not satisfied, then we have to hold up a mirror. And this is what this study does for us, it helps us hold up the mirror to the system, not to the board, not to the superintendent, not to our staff, not to our teachers, but ask a question about what is the system, what does this mirror say about the strengths of our system, the gaps in our system, and what we can do differently. So the report has a lot to unpack, and it provides very clear opportunities for us to look back and ask ourselves, what can we start doing now, and what do we need to prioritize moving forward? And one of the challenges in the system with over 800 employees is that these are systems that all of us inherited. Nobody here created these systems, and nobody in our system is intentionally saying, hey, let's track kids and let's create these disparate systems for certain kids. But now that we have some of this information, it's on us now, right? And it's not on the superintendent, it's not on the board, but collectively with families, with our parents, with our students, with our community and our staff to ask ourselves, are we satisfied with this? No. And if we're not satisfied, then what's our responsibility now moving forward, now that we've held up the mirror to be able to really make the changes that we need, that we also believe that our kids deserve?
Thank you. I know we have some time constraints for Trustee Rivas Fletcher, so I'm gonna have you speak first, please.
Yes, well, I am very thankful that finally we're doing this. I feel that it has been a long way, I suppose, from the moment when the board started to question how it looked like, and Bridget came to me and said we needed diversity in order to work with the achievement gap. And we need to intentionally change how we look in order to understand and be more equitable. I think something started, people who have had experience inside the district about how system works, how inequities are every day, how racism actually looks like in a system that kind of is built to hide it. It is very, I mean, over the years, we've been asking, some of us have been asking to look at this data, to see what's happening. And well, it took years since I started to finally have the ask that we had since the first day. Let's look at the numbers, discriminate them, put the Hispanics apart, put the people of color apart. And we were told, why? What do you want to know if we know the numbers are bad? We kept asking, we kept complaining about it. Finally, we started looking at those numbers and opening new doors and looking at a mirror, which is very important if we want to start to make change. After we change how we look over here, and we change, we have been trying a lot of things and changes that it has been a lot of work, but just probably not enough. Now I'm very glad that finally we got to do the right studies that we've been asking for a while, that we finally made the investment in calling Orenda, and look how the systems are working, are not working. And taking a look to all these things that we've been doing, that we've been talking for quite a few years, and it's not just happening because that's everywhere, or that's in the United States, or that's typical of California, but it shouldn't be. And it's on us to change it. I mean, I am I am glad that we're doing it, and I'm very appreciative of all this work. I am also a little bit mad and a little bit sad that this keep happening, and it's always a process. No, it's gonna take many years. It's gonna take many years, but it never stops. So finally, I feel that we're starting on that. I just want to notice some of the things that we've been told in the last 2 or 3 years. For example, in one of the slides, relative advantage of district school based on 2025 results, we were told, well, what's happening now with MTS in Cherry Chase is because, it's Cherry Chase. It's right to expect that. And when you see the other ones, well, but because the other one have a higher socioeconomic disadvantage, and this is what we expect from the school. And then we see that Vargas, 100% of schools in the same situation, with the same population, with the same everything, are in front of us. That's really unacceptable. Not to talking about Fairwood, that we feel that is, has been in other times spectacular in their achievement. And then we have this great gap that 22%, like 88% of schools in this with the same demographic, the same socioeconomic status, the same, are doing better. So it's really eye-opening, and at last we have the data here to prove it and to move forward. Because again, we have a lot of good things happening. Finally, we found out this year that our ELA curriculum, we keep approving new curriculum, we keep approving new things, thinking that this is the change that we need, and now this year we find that our ELD curriculum is terrible and it's like 20 years older. I was telling from English learning teachers for years, they've been telling me that we don't have an ELD curriculum for middle schools. We've been saying that, and we've been gaslighted. Yes, we do, that's a lie, and we are using this and we're using that, and apparently we are validated that no, there's not really one. The teachers are just, working with their nails, trying to figure out how to reinvent the wheel every day. So we're not giving them the tools to actually work in a reasonable way, a professional way. And then I'm very sad when I saw the adults' expectations of our kids in the middle of Silicon Valley, in the middle of Sunnyvale, and then we have a lot of adults that, it doesn't surprise me, because just a few weeks ago, I was talking with some paraeducators and I was listening to this data from their mouth, like it was nothing. Like, this is obviously what's happening. These kids are never gonna achieve anything. And now I've seen it like, in a survey in paper with numbers and data. And, it's eye-opening. It's eye-opening why the adults in our district and in our system even think that our kids are not gonna get into IUC or into Harvard or into Stanford. Well, what's the problem? Why exactly? Is because there are too many, are we too many of me over there? The people who look like me or talk like me, and they're never going to achieve anything, because I have many degrees and I think I am a highly accomplished people, and everybody in my family is. And just because we're Latino doesn't mean that we're more stupid. And I just heard that back to a couple of weeks ago, that it's harder for people with socioeconomic disadvantage, what she was saying, and people with minorities to achieve at the same rate that other people are, and it's just something that we need to change. I know that it is not that common in everybody and all the adults, but it's there, and we have a lot of that, and that needs to change. And we are a highly looked for district. We hire at a very fast rate normally because our salaries are pretty good compared to people outside our district, compared to other people locally, other people regionally. And as we are Silicon Valley, we must spend in the whole state and probably in the whole United States. It is, so we have our administrators, everybody, our classified employees, and our teachers should be the best of the best because we're paying for the best of the best. And we need to expect for the best and the best for our kids. And we just got a great, thank you to our community, great bonds, and we are building the best schools, sustainable schools, because our kids deserve it. And we are hiring the best teachers because our kids deserve it. And if they're not the best of everything, we don't need them. We need the best of the best. And that's where we're investing so much. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ms. Flowers. Trustee Watson, would you like to add some thoughts?
I wondered if you wanted to ask any of the thoughts from the audience. I mean, let you have that prerogative first, if you'd like.
There are many. I think maybe if we can have just a general reflection, and then we can get into the specifics and going forward. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to touch briefly also on the question of like why we're doing this, and I think Trustee Hugas Flemmers said it very well when she said we made a promise and we have to keep it. Going through the strategic plan as a community was positive in that it involved a lot of people looking at our data, not in a public way like this. It was more in different kinds of focus groups, different types of gatherings, and really getting a lot of consensus from the community about expectations for our students and what we want. And just like, when you ask parents, I'm a former teacher and I still teach ESL to adults, and when you ask people what they want for their kids, they talk about, like life, they don't talk about like, I want them to get, well, some people do, but most people are like, I want them to have friends, and I want them to be happy, and I want them to be able to support themselves, I want them to do interesting things, and I want them to go to great, have great life experiences. And to do all those things, to have those opportunities, we know we need to give them a great education. That strategic plan was like the community giving input, and then we had a couple of years of where we were starting to implement the strategic plan. I think the first thing we focused on was attendance, getting kids here. So, we did a lot of improvement for attendance, especially for some vulnerable groups. But beyond that, there was so much, the system was kind of overwhelming. And then when Dr. Gallagher decided to retire, we had an opportunity to, again, get community involvement to talk about what our vision was for our district. And I think it was, over 900 surveys and focus group people and interviews. And pretty much everyone said we need systems change. We heard that over and over. It was very clear. We were lucky enough to find Dr. Crosswaite, and Dr. Crosswaite was listening to us, and had gone back and looked at some of our previous conversations on the board, because we're recording them all now, and had lots of discussions with us, and walked around and saw things and was investigating things, and he knew of a resource that could help us with questions we've been wanting to ask for a long time. So I don't think it's, nobody made us do it, unlike some districts where you have a government entity come in and say, you need to fix this problem, right? This isn't a self-awareness. And I sort of feel like, when it comes to, it is going to be very hard for the adults. It's going to be hard for the board. We're going to hear a lot of negative things about ourselves and about, how hard change is and how, you know, we're gonna be figuring this out along the way, we're gonna make some recommendations. Change is hard, like, you know, I hate changing stuff that I'm doing, you know, so, but it's a moral imperative to make these changes. It's absolutely a moral imperative. And I think that we are a very data-driven community in Sunnyvale with technology and lots of people who are trying to make educated decisions about things. So this report I find super painful, a little bit depressing and saddening. But very vindicating for the changes that we need to make. And I think that in having conversations with you down in at the retreat that we had where we had some training, one thing that really stuck with me is that the best way to make this change is not to train anybody or tell them what we're doing, you know, give them a one-time thing, but to like do the work with them and have them experience success of kids who they don't expect to succeeding, and then telling them what a great teacher they are and what a great administrator they are and how we're all doing this together, but to just reinforcing and getting more and more wins in the column of these students really can do it and we're doing it together. And that just has stayed with me. And I feel like anyone who says, why are we gonna go to, why is the board interested in moving to letter grades for middle school? Like, we've always done it this way. My kids did great with it this way. Like, it wasn't a problem for me. Why do we have to change now? And the reason we have to change now is because we know that there's a problem for them when they get into A to G requirements for their university application. We know that there needs to be some straightening out of the letter grading system. Like, it's all just right here. So I really appreciate all the work, and I'm looking forward to more collaboration, and I'm looking forward to, you know, I don't know what the next steps are as far as the board giving direction, but I'm very interested in following through with these recommendations and also taking a hard look at the grading. And I'm willing to take the heat for it, and I'm willing to do the work of spreading the word. So one of my questions was, you know, if we could just, what is the communication plan for this? I think we've all, I know that I've expressed that I think that we should share this with the school sites, with the teams who have given the feedback for the data, not just in a recorded environment, but an opportunity to ask questions. And I think it's important for the community to understand that we have this, maybe why we started this survey and this investigation and what changes it's going to lead to. But I'm just sort of wondering if you've sketched out a communication plan.
So we've been talking with Mr. McGuire about doing another presentation for us where he's going to record it so that we can also make it available to the community as well as to our staff, because it's hard to, I don't think anyone can do it justice the way you did in terms of sharing it out. And by the way, I think that today was this was my 7th presentation I've listened with you. And every time I listen to it, I hear and learn new things that I just didn't pick up the first time. But to that, we do have a draft communication ready to go out tomorrow, not only for our staff, but to our community as well. The messaging was included and to our staff, but to your point, it was not included to the community. And I wanted to do it after this based on some of the conversation discussion as well. But we also want to make it available online and have it so that we can also translate it and try to figure out how to best do that. Like today, we were unable to procure or secure our translators for this. But secondly, it's also prioritizing in terms of what are those next steps, because there's a lot to unpack in this presentation. And there are some very clear things about what we can do in terms of here at the district office with district leadership. And again, this is, Scott, I appreciate the way you said this. It's about what can we do here to support what sites are doing, to support what teachers are doing, to support their work in the classrooms, right? So it needs to start here, but I think what, you've heard from the public comments about appreciating that this has been made public, that we've made the effort to do this, not easy to do. And it is upsetting. But if it's not upsetting to you, I don't know what to tell you, but we should all be upset about this. And it's a great opportunity for us to come together as a community and again to demonstrate, not only at the local level, but statewide and nationally, about what's possible when adults come together and make decisions that are best for kids, right? But if this was easy work, everyone would be doing it. The reality is that this is hard work, but it's also hard work. And we need to believe in kids, and sometimes it's through action, where we're gonna change our behaviors and be able to demonstrate increased opportunities for students, and that will change our mindsets as well.
So I understand what you're saying, and I understand the plan to record this and to have it, I'm excited that we're gonna have it available to the public and, for information, but I think that, I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but I think there's value in there being an opportunity for questions, from the staff, so, especially because all of the staff members, we did so many schools on a deep dive. Initially, I think we were just gonna do a few, and then we said, can we do more? And we wanna make sure all of the schools at least have that light touch opportunity. But for the schools who gave the feedback to go into this, in some way, which is all of them, even if they watch the presentation, they might have some things that come up or questions that they wanna ask, and I don't know if it's I don't really know if it's fair to put that on the principal, so I'm wondering if there's any possibility of a facilitated conversation. Maybe they could have the opportunity, they could have the opportunity to watch it first and then have a conversation, or even if it's just a feedback conversation. And then similarly with the community, there's parents who are very new to our district, there's people who have been through our district, maybe like a town hall or some sort of a way to not necessarily just see the presentation, but to ask questions. I don't know, what do other people think? Maybe that's just.
I would say I would also be interested from Scott if he has seen that, if other districts have done a town hall type forum for community, for families, for staff, what are if you have seen that done well, what does that look like?
That's a good question. Not necessarily town hall style share outs. What we have seen most commonly is, and when we talk about recording the presentation, it's not just another recording of this, but it's really the actual PowerPoint with me doing a voiceover. So it is at a site's pace. The principals aren't responsible for regurgitating that entire story, because it's a lot. And the presentation itself is very heavy in graphics, not heavy in narrative. So for them to tell that story, it's nearly impossible unless you've been ingrained in it for weeks and weeks and weeks. So most traditionally what we'll see is the meeting itself being posted publicly, and then we'll see the narrated PowerPoint. We'll call it a video, but it's really a narrated PowerPoint, so that sites, leadership, they can kind of digest it in chunks. As you see, just me talking through it, it was an hour and 40 minutes. And that was without questions, that was without reflection, that was just me going. So most will break it up into chunks. When principals do lead it, there's sometimes districts will come up with common points to pause and then to elicit feedback from those that are the viewers. In most cases, it's teachers and or staff or those that participated in the process, but that it's reflective in similar ways, meaning those reflection questions are open-ended, but everyone gets the same opportunity to reflect. And then most of the time it's, they'll leverage Google Docs or what have you, so that at the end, the collective nature of all of the reflections can land in a singular place, so those sharings don't get lost after the event, right? They stay memorialized somewhere. So that's kind of been the best practice. I have not seen like a roadshow like town hall for this purpose. I do know that there's a district or two that are currently like a step beyond where you are right now, more like in an implementation phase, in particular with some alignment pieces where they're doing a roadshow really about the why behind the work. Not necessarily a front loading of this is the work, but a really heartfelt face-to-face, I am with you, you are with me conversation around this is why it's imperative that we do this. And really from the superintendent and associate soups going around and saying, look, this is important enough to where we're here to discuss it and to share our thoughts. So that's what I see most commonly. Yes.
So I mean, I think that also, I mean, that sounds like a great plan. I do like the idea of, but I like the opportunity for feedback and co-creating, co-reflecting. I think that would be helpful, especially for staff and even for families who are interested.
Trustee Maginot or Profeta, any thoughts?
Okay, reminding it, so I just, right, like I feel like so many thoughts, so many notes, so much stuff in different directions, right? So there's I have the stuff from like communities, comments, and some of it connects to some of the stuff mine. Then right, Isabel's was a lot of just like general reflection on it. And then also I have some like specific, like digging into more either questions or comments related to the presentation. So my question is, like, what are we, what of that do you want tonight?
Like maybe a broader discussion, but then we can get into the details after both Trustee Profeta and I had a chance to just have a general, like a reflection,
Yeah.
and then we can get into more details.
Okay. Okay, so I think, sorry, I just have so much stuff. Okay, so I think what I'll kind of share, I think are kind of some of my general stuff is, so I'll start with, I wrote down on one of the pages where I kind of pulled teacher or staff comments. And I felt like, right, it doesn't capture everything, there's so much, but I was like, this is kind of a good summary of the work and why we're doing this, and kind of my feeling about it. So as we are working really hard and the returns are not there. And I think, and that's been echoed a lot, right? We have so much fabulous staff, right? In all places who are working so hard, but the returns aren't there, right? And so, I just thought that captured it really well in that space of, like it's not gonna happen overnight, but kind of what Bridget was saying with what we talked about at our Orinda conference a couple months ago, right? Is as we start doing the work and we see people's perspectives, like, oh, I thought this kid couldn't learn. This kid just exceeded expectations, and that can help change perspectives and change thinking. Anyway, so I really love that. I feel like that quote just for me kind of helps summarize. And then kind of connected to that, and this is sure to make me cry because I totally cried when this, I'm gonna share the story of what happened, but what made me think about it tonight. I gotta find the note. Oh my gosh. I lost the note. Okay, so okay, I'm trying to go off my memory a little bit. So I can't remember whose comment or what it was exactly said. Hopefully I'll find it later and I'll maybe bring it up later. But somebody said something tonight that was connected to, maybe something Isabel said. I don't remember. Anyway, sorry, my brain's just everywhere. The space related to the page that was about staff's perspectives, right? And I can't remember the exact, what the two questions were, like, how many students do you think will get A through G, right? That was the first question. And then the second one was, how many, I said about the parents, but just.
Parents want their child to attend college or university upon graduation.
Yes, thank you. And so just connected that, and again, I wish I could find it in my notes. the space made me think about this, but what it made me think about was not related to our district at all, a different education space, but in the education space. I can get through this. Somebody essentially said, we know the students who are gonna make it and the students who aren't. And I lost it. It squoze my husband and he was like, ouch. And I was like, sorry. And I literally had to get up and leave the room because it was this big thing it's not a space where I could have said something, but I was so furious and so upset that someone in the education space related to students of color would say that I had to leave the room. It was made worse by as I left the room, then all of the students that they were helping and supporting who were students of color, I walked past them and went in the bathroom and I just lost it because I was so furious, right? That somebody would think that. And it's hard too because it's somebody who right, cares about right, she is doing work to help students, right? Anyway, I was just, I wish I could remember exactly what someone said to make me think about that, but I just think this, that's at the heart of why we're doing this work, right? That there are people with really, really good intentions who have this belief that I can know ahead of time which kids are gonna succeed and which kids are not gonna succeed. And yeah, anyway, I think that's kind of the heart of this space. And I guess the other piece I want to share just kind of generally, where I'm going to take a slightly different spin and maybe a different spin of people are saying angry and frustrated. And I have had those things over the years. And I think a lot of this data, we at least I feel like I've seen many pieces of it over the years, not this much. And there's new stuff for sure that was helpful. But for me, I think a lot of it was not new. I knew it and have been frustrated for a long time. So actually, some of the feeling is when I first saw this data was actually a little bit of excitement and happiness, not because of the data itself, right? But the space of especially in the parts, and we'll hopefully can dive into it later, of the less vulnerable and more vulnerable, so I was excited about the potential, right? There are other schools and places out there in similar circumstances who are doing this work. So not that I'm happy about where we are at right now, but I actually for me, a lot of this actually feels exciting and hopeful. And I think I'm also someone who's likes to problem solve, but you have to know what the problem is to solve it. Anyway, it's just a slightly different, I think we're all the same, right, on the same page, but that's just a little bit of, hey, we are in a place that is primed to it's going to be hard, but to do this work and to move the needle for so many more of our students.
Hi. I'll try to make it short. Everyone here said a lot of things that are very meaningful and true. So I won't repeat a lot of things, but I'm the newest member here, and I haven't seen as much data as my colleagues here. But the data that we were shown today, or when we had our presentation the other day, it's very disturbing, and it's something that we need to work on. And just hearing all the people here with their comments, we have a lot of things to work on, and some things that I heard is how to motivate staff and encourage. Why do we have low expectations? How will we support? What are the next steps? How do we publicize more to the public? When will these things happen? These are all things that's in our heads too. And what I want to make sure that we do is to include the teachers, the families, to the children, because we're all here for the children and we're doing it for the children. And if we're not all working together and we're just not working alongside, then we're not going to be doing it right. So,
just hearing teachers saying that we're collecting data, but where does it go, what's happening to it? And I'm glad that we have this Orenda study. Thank you so much for being here. And it's just helping us to start, and when we start, and Dr. Crossway said now. So I'm glad that we're here today and that we're all here to support each other, us to support you, and you to support us so we can support everyone.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to remain in the excited, hopeful space as well, but I do have to admit that I do have a lot of negative feelings about this report, including anger and shame, and I know that's not very productive, but I know that there's other people that also feel that way, so I want to say, yes, I feel that too, and this is validating to see, but really we shouldn't have gotten to a point where Glenda, you and your husband 13 years ago looked up the data and said, well, Sunnyvale is not serving the Black and brown kids well. And we are still here. And my concerns have to do about systems change and how we can make those conditions that support learning. But there's some really heavy things here. We have culture of low expectations. We have racism, right? It's top down, low trust. These are very heavy systems changes that are needed. And I have a lot of concern about the people that are with our students and feeling the weight of, and having said that, has felt very top down. So here comes something else. Is this just gonna be something else? Now the district has a different direction, and here we're gonna be asked to do this now. And getting people on board in terms of the heart, right? Aligning our work so that it is meaningful. I feel like this is a very heavy lift, and I do believe that culture of belief and hope begins here with our governance team and with Dr. Crossway, and knowing that we can make this difference, that the relative advantage slide showing just how low we are performing compared to how well we in theory should be was completely eye-opening for me. So this is our starting point. I feel like this is baseline, right? And there's a lot of work to do. We have to build systems. We have to get people on board, and I think for me, looking at this data and seeing it's very, very uncomfortable. And like, it should be uncomfortable, right? We are part of this system. I know it's not specific people, but this is the system that we are in right now, and it's not pretty. So how can we pull together? I'm going to be looking for some guidance from our teaching and learning, from our new superintendent, and making sure that we have the people as well in place to support the work that has to be done. Because we've seen each other, we've seen ourselves as racists before. We did anti-racist training for years. And still, we have these beliefs that persist. So I guess the question is, how is what we're going to do now different than what we've done in the past? Okay, yes.
Also, I just wanted to say that, I think that one thing that, I think Isabel mentioned about how all the schools have room for improvement, right? Like everybody, and Cherry Chase is getting the distinguished school, and there was a lot of progress monitoring cycles and a lot of intentionality that went into that, but you can also just see that school, it's not based on, it does take a lot out of the weighting of socioeconomics in that, and then some of these other vulnerability factors. But there's room for everyone to rise here. So I think this is like a call to action for everybody. It's not just, oh, there's one school here, one school there, and I'm sure that the school that is performing, within a high band for its vulnerability factors, I'm sure they also want to keep growing, right? So, but I feel like there's just so much improvement to be had for everyone that it's a great incentive for all of us to keep going, to move ourselves forward. So I am hopeful that it's not just like depressing news, it's like, hey, there's, like Michelle said, there's other people who are doing this. I did want to say, like, when Isabel first came on the board, within her first or second board meeting, we were able to encourage the district leadership to allow all middle school students who were English learners to have an elective. And before she came on board, that wasn't a possibility. And so I know that seems like it was just a policy change that affected schedules, and it was like right around January, right? So they were like thinking about schedules for the next year. So it was something small, and it took like a lot of effort and work, but it was like, it had a high impact for that group of kids. I think some of the work we're gonna do here, like if we start moving towards the recommendations of going deep into the standards and letting the standards drive rather than just the curriculum driving, it won't matter necessarily what curriculum we get, because the teachers will be deeply involved in doing the work. And hopefully we'll get a great curriculum, that's what we want. But, and they need a curriculum, but they need the tools, but I think that like the recommendations here seem very teacher engaging and staff, and I'm just wondering if there's some of them that also probably need to be done, or that could be done at the district office, like in terms of looking at our middle school grading. Like are there some things like within here that like we could just say, like, yes, come back to us with more of this, like how are you thinking it's gonna roll out? Because like, you know how I feel about this 60% for a 3, right? But just the other, like the idea of like a middle school grade to fix some of this stuff, like what's retroactive, like how are we gonna repair some of the stuff that we know that's just been elevated here as like, it's gotta be more than just on paper, like how do we say yes to some of this?
So, I mean, you're saying yes by making this public and being transparent about it. So that's a critical first step, because, the reality is that this is not an easy report to digest, right? And we're still affirming a lot of the strengths that we have here in the school district, but also, again, holding up that mirror. But to your point, there are some things that we can immediately do. And as Trustee Pimenta shared earlier, it's like now, it's not about tomorrow, let's find this out. But part of the work has already been about identifying that we have some gaps. With your support, we were able to create the Director of Student Achievement, focusing in on MTSS already, engaging in conversations with our middle schools so that we can revisit not only grading practices, again, no fault on the teachers either. This is a systemic issue, not on them. And then with that is also looking at scheduling. Are we placing our students in the least restrictive environments? Are we giving them access to standards-based materials, curriculum, lessons, etc.? Those are some of the things that we can, do immediately. But other things, here's the thing, it's like if you want to go, what is it? I'm really bad at this, right? If you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, you go alone. So we're not looking at doing this alone. We have to do this and co-create with our staff. Thank you, Mr. Alex, and support and do this together. And so by doing this together, there's some things that we have to have conversations about. We have to bring people into the same space, engaging in our conversations, and ask ourselves, what do we believe in, kids, right? What can we do here as a Sunnyvale community? And collectively develop or revisit like our strategic plan. Is our strategic plan a clear guide of where we want to be and how we're going to get there? Because right now our strategic plan is like 52 pages, but it's not very deep when it comes to academic outcomes. It's a lot of the social emotional, it's a lot of the student support services, which nothing wrong with that, but we also need to make sure that it has a robust plan of action to address academics. And this is not in any way about micromanaging and having our staff teach the tests. But when we think about our Sunnyvale promise about knowing every kid by name, strength, and need, like, are we really capable of doing that if we don't have the right supports and systems in place? And so we really know every kid by name, strength, and need. We should also be able to differentiate the supports that they need so that they can be successful. But it does require a lot of other conversations moving forward. But at the same time, concurrently, we can still engage in some of this other work. And we are expecting to see some changes at the middle schools in terms of scheduling for next year. That's already in the works. The other thing that Mr. McGuire mentioned is the collaboration between Sunnyvale School District and Fremont Union School District, right? And that's something that we've begun conversations in the fall as well. And Fremont Union is also going to be working with us in collaboration in developing a network with other school districts so that we can have better collaboration and articulation along the way. But again, there's a lot of other things, and like one thing that I heard in my 7th presentation with Mr. McGuire is maximizing the opportunities for kids. So winter break, our spring break, on the breaks, including exploring how we can maximize our after-school programs and Saturdays so that kids are in structured, safe spaces where they can be supported and moving forward as well. So that's another one that we're working on as well. So there are some things that we're working on simultaneously. And then it's also going to ask us to pause and ask ourselves, is this initiative really going to support these efforts? And if it's not, do we have the capacity to take everything on? Because it can be overwhelming as well.
So when you said about scheduling, did you also mean about the office aides and the TA spots?
Yes, so we are no longer we're going to maximize our opportunities for students to be in academic environments and not outside the classroom and not in academic spaces. So no more office practice, teacher assistant positions.
While we're talking about middle school schedules, can you speak a little bit to 0-7th period and those opportunities?
Well, we want to, I know in the past we've had some challenges with the 0 or 7th period, but we want to be able to continue providing students and families with opportunities to accelerate and give them additional options. And if we in the past have said we're going to create this elective and all those kids have to take it, that's not an opportunity. But if you open up those opportunities for all kids and it's available for students who are in the Juntos program to accelerate, that's a great opportunity. But let's do it in a way that doesn't make it look like we're being punished for being in the Juntos program, so that it's optional and additional enrichment opportunities for them as well. And so for us, when it comes to VAPA, music and the arts and some STEM courses, and even the future possibilities of dual enrollment where our 7th and 8th grade, even 6th grade students, to be honest with you, are able to take community college courses, those are additional options where we can explore the 0 to 7th period summer programs as well. It doesn't have to just happen to be during the traditional 1st through 6th period day.
Any other thoughts?
So is it okay if I kind of go through some of the questions stuff and then people can tag on to other ones too? So I think first one, I can't see it, it's recording. You said course A, I think you're referring to A through G. So for those who
That's an AIDE, aid course.
Teacher's aid, office aid.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, just in case, if anyone doesn't know what A through G is, then that is essentially, right, like there are the classes, so that's in high school, so this is not us, right? At high school level, right, there are certain classes you have to take to graduate, but then on top of that, is those classes plus a few others that are A through G, and so if you do those classes, I'm giving a very short, not exact summary. If you do those classes, then that means you can go to a CSU or a UC. That's a very simplified explanation of what A through G is. For the, I think my kind of main, and there's a few other ones, but I think kind of the main questions that people had, that I also had too, was kind of in the space, like I'll read off some of their questions and then kind of share my thought too, is like the how do you maintain staff morale, the curiosity of like, this is like a lot of weight on teachers and support staff and office staff at the schools. What is the district and the board going to do to support teachers working really hard, needing support, like how can parents support next steps. Anyway, so kind of in that space of what people were asking, the question that I kind of had coming into this, which I think connects to that, is like, and we don't necessarily have the answer maybe tonight, but kind of in the next steps is what's going to be different from the district to support this work. And it connects, I can't remember, one of you guys said this question, which I wrote this down too, because I was like, this is very similar, that how is what we are going to do different from what we've done in the past? Which isn't the same question, but in that similar vein. But I would just say, I think that is this kind of space, which I think we all are aware of, but I think is like the most important space as we move the needle, right? And it's kind of what Dr. Crossway said too about, right, like I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I mean, it makes sense, right? The like, you go fast alone, or what was it? Long together. Right, that space, that like being mindful and acknowledging, right, that there are so many people like working so hard, kind of how do we keep that morale up? And anyway, but yeah, so what's going to be different from the district to support this work? I think there's not quite an answer tonight, but that's a question that I think is a question that like in the follow-ups would be an important one to answer.
Yeah, I think you've said to us a few times about the kinds of work that is going to be happening with the teacher teams, right? Like going into the standards. Maybe you could talk about that.
Sure, so I mean, one of the recommendations is the curriculum alignment. And right now, if you were to ask third grade teachers at one school versus another school, or even within the same site, what should all third graders know by the end of the year? Would we get the same response? And so it's an opportunity for us to engage in conversations with our teachers and ask them that question. And then for teachers to then basically come forward and say, here's what we think that all third graders should be able to know and be able to do and demonstrate. And so then the question is, how will we know? And then so right now, if you look at the math standards, there's hundreds of math standards, but how do we really focus in on the critical standards moving forward? So I'll give you a brief example of this happening at the university level. ASU was struggling with its engineering department, and students were entering engineering and they were not succeeding. And it came down to calculus. And students were struggling with calculus and not able to successfully pass calculus to be able to continue in their degree. So they went and they spoke with the professionals and asked them, what do students need to become engineers? And so they revisited their engineering course of study. And ASU now has thousands of students who graduate with engineering degrees every year. And they're competing with the Carnegie Mellon and other universities as well. And so for us, it's an opportunity to engage in those conversations with our staff and have them co-create what those expectations are based on what the state standards say. But then separately, it's also looking at the rigor, as Mr. McGuire mentioned, right? It's not just that we're teaching standards-based lessons, et cetera, but to what rigor? And is there alignment across the district when it comes to that? So those are some of the work, identifying what those standards are. We call them whatever you want, critical, essential standards. But then the other thing is the curriculum alignment, so that whether you're at one school or another, one grade to another, you're clear about what third grade expectations are, fourth grade expectations, and if a student or staff goes from one school to another school, the expectations are similar. But then separately, we develop our own formative assessments where our teachers are engaged in that process, and we're able to use those data on a regular basis to help them better understand how students are progressing or not progressing, what do we need to do differently. And then separately is teaching has been done in isolation for such a long time. The way that public education was set up was not created to really serve today's needs and demands. And teachers need more opportunities to come together, to collaborate, to reflect on their lessons, to look at data together, but also to develop lessons in collaboration. Sort of like a Japanese lesson design or lesson study. Those are structures that we don't currently have in place. We have some of them in place to a certain extent, but how do we enhance those to again truly support our staff? And those are things that we can start doing here as well.
So in that space, I have concern about the teachers who we've been asking them to do things, and like we've seen in all these quotes, the data is not meaningful. We do the cycles, but we never do anything with it. So we're asking teachers in many cases to take that leap of faith that this is different.
Yeah.
How can we support that and it actually like be different and authentically, something that they believe in as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is not unique to Sunnyvale. Sunnyvale is not the first district that's gone through a look in the mirror to create systems that support these conversations and structures and things like that. So there's models out there already, and we can engage in conversations, visit other schools, et cetera. But there's also research on this as well. The other thing is building trust. Is what we say congruent with our behaviors? Is what comes out of my mouth congruent with what I say and do at the end of the day? So we have to build trust. We have to be in that same space together. But the other thing is that we're providing some guidelines, some support, and some structures. But at the end of the day, the teachers, they still need to be involved in those conversations. So if we say we need to develop a system to be able to support a teacher release time, that's on us here at the district office. But what that protocol and what those conversations are, we can provide some guidelines and some parameters of what the expectations are, but the teachers have to own it. And they're gonna have to also invest in it and update these protocols to meet their needs. So if the formative assessments are not meeting their needs, then we need to give teachers those opportunities to revisit those formative assessments so that they truly are meaningful for them and for their students. So it's not a one-time thing. This is an ongoing cycle of reflection, of recreating, of collaborating, and refining the systems that we want to support our schools with.
I guess a follow-up related too. So I'm just thinking about the space, right? You were saying like, including the teachers, right, having them if something's not working for them. So I'm just thinking about, right, so I don't really know for sure, say we have like 30 third grade teachers or whatever, right? All of them are probably not going to agree on what they think is the best formative assessment, or, just like different teachers have different preferences for different curriculum, right? We have different personalities, we come from different spaces. So, right, this is totally me going into like the weeds and like the nitty gritty, but what does that look like, right? Like, you're never gonna have all 30 of them agree on something.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what does that look like? How do you move forward
messy.
successfully in that space?
It's not easy, so I mean, and here's the thing, I've done this work a long time ago in very different circumstances. And back then, for example, I think we had 42 teachers per grade level. And at 12 elementary schools. And 12 elementary schools couldn't come to an agreement. And so 12 elementary schools identified their own different standards. 12 elementary schools identified their own formative assessments. And that's how it started. And was it ideal? No. Did it allow for collaboration across school sites? It didn't. What ended up happening is I'm good friends with, Peggy, but she's at a different school site. I really want to collaborate with her, but we don't have the same standards nor the assessments. Can we develop our own? And that led to the schools and saying, in order for this to really work and for us to have a culture of collaboration, we need to come to the same. And it happened organically through them. It wasn't me directing them or anything like that. So that's one way that it can happen. I think the easier thing is for it to be from the very beginning with our 8 elementary schools having some agreements. But that's where we need a partner with the experience who has done this work in other districts to be able to facilitate those conversations and guide us there, because I can't pretend to tell you that I can personally do that work at this time. Mr. McGuire?
Just real quick, you can get 40 third grade teachers in the room. When the initiative is led with the why to start with. I know it sounds cliche, but the purpose that's driving the process, if that's the anchor and you start that way, and then there's recognition that the alignment process will never be perfect from the beginning and that it evolves as teachers' understanding evolves, as you get deeper data and understand how students are evolving, so that initial agreement around what essential standards are, potentially what the common formative assessment is originally, that there's time and space for it to evolve and to change, and that you're not committing to something that's 6 years out, 8 years out. No, it's, can you live with it for right now? Does it make sense for right now? And can you not marry it, but can you date it till springtime, right? Where then you get to revise, right? You get to look at the essential standards, and maybe your August self that put it together didn't know what your October self knows and said, man, what were we thinking back then? Well, if that's baked in and there's grace that's given to staff to say, you know what? Yeah, let's maybe not blow it up in the springtime, but there are some things that we mindfully want to change for good reason, then let that be okay, right? So you're not necessarily having to jump in both feet and commit to something that's a 10-year process, only knowing what you know in the moment, right? The fact that it gets to live and to breathe and get better as teachers get more deeper in their understanding, I think that's the part that allows that leap of faith initially. That there's a time not too far from the time that you commit that you can change who you date, right? You can fix it. You can make those repairs. You can take what you've learned over a cycle or two and say, you know what, I think these standards should come earlier in the year or later in the year. Man, we assessed it this way. It didn't feel great. Like as long as the process is open for that, and that it's rooted in one, state adjudicated rigor, but that the teacher's experience and expertise of delivering that information and how organic instruction is, as long as you're not losing the art side of that and teaching doesn't become just rote and robotic, and then I think that you're in a good place. And I think it honors both sides of the thing of practice. And I think you'd be surprised at or maybe not surprised at what teacher teams will agree to when the conditions are right.
So I think that having a high degree of rigor it would be great, right? Higher floor for everybody. But if we're still dealing, if we still have within our system teachers who don't believe certain students can learn or do the harder rigor academics, how do we get through that? What have you seen that has worked in other districts?
So, great question, because that is not a Sunnyvale thing, that's an everywhere thing. There are, to varying degrees, those that think kids can and can't, wherever you go. One thing that's never worked is professionally developing it out of them, right? For those adults that think kids can't, you're not gonna have a PD or a training that's gonna change their mind. If anything else, they're gonna regress further into there, and those that didn't feel that way before are gonna start to feel guilty. Like, oh, I didn't know I felt that way until you told me I felt that way. And that creates its own kind of ball of wax. What really changes beliefs and expectations is not the direct addressing of the beliefs and expectations to begin with, but it's establishing a system that has a floor of expectations for all kids. And that when not necessarily the teacher of record, if that is or the staff member of record, or the administrator, or whomever is harboring the beliefs of kids can't, right? Because that can land in anyone's lap. But the moment that those kids who, in the mind of that believer, of someone that they can't, once they do, and even the smallest of increments, it needs to be celebrated loudly, proudly, and widely, and obviously. And the more often that students show that they can, especially students who someone previously thought couldn't, the more often they show that they can, that's what starts slowly but surely changing minds, thoughts, and beliefs. The idea that you can do, a bias training or like I said, that 9.9 times out of 10, that's not going to work. But it's the repeated celebration of, in the face of, I thought they couldn't and they did, and everyone is celebrating my kid who I thought they couldn't, privately in the brain that starts to change. And so it's about establishing first and foremost, what is the academic floor for all kids in the district? What's the non-negotiable? Teachers are involved in that conversation. They can, I don't want to, speak to your process because your process hasn't yet been written. However, it's in most cases, through looking at state level rigor and blueprints and standards, teachers determine, what their essential standards are based on local data, based on local context, their expertise, coupled with the state level expectations. And so once they come up with that, then now you're just measuring kids against that. And it's not, and you're establishing the floor, not the ceiling, so anything below this floor is not on my watch, right? Every kid in Sunnyvale will have the minimum of this. That's all you're establishing. The ceiling, the sky is the limit. And when kids meet the moment, you celebrate them loud and proud. And that's what changes thought patterns and beliefs and expectations.
Board, were there any other specific topics that you wanted to bring up at this time? I just think that I think that the idea of a floor, when I think back to like when we were making the goals for the strategic plan and we were saying that every student will improve, I think having the floor at being grade level, I think the power in articulating that is profound, because if, I just hear, when I hear the kids say things like, where they are articulating their own, what's expected of them, they're very clear about that. When adults are clear with them, they're very clear about what's expected of them. And so I think if we can just say that, if the floor is higher than grade level, okay. But I think, I just don't want it to be, I guess I sort of always assumed that the floor was grade level. I think having it never be articulated and have it always just be, well, everyone's gonna grow. It never occurred to me that we weren't always trying to help kids get to where they need to be so that they can do what they need to do in high school and beyond. So now it's in our promise that we're gonna get them to high school, be prepared for high school and beyond. I think we have to explicitly say what that floor is. So I'm all for revising the promise if necessary. That's what I was saying. I really appreciate this whole conversation. I'm so glad it's in public. I'm glad it's going to be recorded, and our conversation was recorded, but I'm really glad that it's going to be professionally put together. So
with the Spanish version.
With the Spanish version too, yes. Mr. McGuire, do we have anything further on our contract already with you? What can we expect?
So the only thing that's attached to our current contract now are two additional, I believe it's two additional power clinics, which is a fancy term for just leadership meetings. It's to also help digest and process the findings and recommendations. And then depending on when the disposition of the district in terms of needs of support or no support from us, then that determines kind of what the content of those power clinics kind of look like. But that's it. It was the study and then 2 to 3 administrative kind of meetings around the study results. And then there's no other commitment at this point moving forward. And I believe that there was some work done with master schedule and which I don't know the ins and outs of that work. However, there may be a little bit extra tying up those ends for the master schedule work.
Okay, great. And Dr. Cressway, for us, in terms of hearing back and getting updates, I know that we are aligning these recommendations with our district priorities as well. What can we expect as a board and a community to be hearing back in terms of updates?
Well, we want to be able to come back to you with like some very clear next steps based on the study's recommendations as well. Then also revisiting our district priorities and making updates to capture these moving forward. We're meeting with our principals the Tuesday after spring break as well, so that we can continue these conversations. They got a preview of this study this afternoon. And again, there's a lot here. What can we start doing now? What have we already done? And be able to provide you with those updates. And then secondly, what are the next steps for the next 2 to 3 years in terms of like, are we ready and willing to do the work in terms of like the curriculum alignment, the formative assessments, what type of professional development support is needed for our school sites, for our administrators, our teachers, and then how do we create these structures and opportunities for teachers to be able to collaborate, make sure that they're able to use these data in a way that helps them inside the classrooms. So those are all the other things that we have to be able to recommend as well. But in the meantime, we've already begun with the communication, the messaging. We have engaged in conversations regarding the master schedule and course access at the middle schools, including like the teacher aides, but also ELD structures, identifying and being clear about what is a newcomer. We conducted a newcomer listening tour at our middle schools where we basically asked our newcomer students, what do they like about school, what do we do well, what do we need to do differently? And those were also not easy to hear, but very insightful in terms of what we need to do differently. And the other thing is our grading practices with PowerSchool, our 4 scale versus 5, and the collaboration articulation with the high school districts as well. So that's a lot right there, but as you can see, there's a lot more. But some of these things are going to take a lot more time, conversation, and potentially a partner to help us navigate these next steps.
Okay, and I will mention that I've been looking at like other districts that have used Orenda, and they have an executive summary that's kind of more of a narrative form that I think we would benefit from as well. And then in their follow-up, I was looking at MBWSD specifically. They have timelines of implementation, kind of like calendaring out what to expect and when. So perhaps that's something that we can be looking at going forward as well. Yes, please.
Okay, the first one is just, I forgot earlier we talked about stuff. I just wanted to comment briefly on strategic plan. And I think maybe said this somewhere else, but just again, that I think, right, because I think, right, it says like strategic plan, and I don't think we need to fully do all new strategic plan. This is again my perspective, right? I think our promise is really awesome. I think our 4 main, I don't remember what they're called, like our 4 main like focus areas, goals areas, what?
Pillars? Are they pillars?
I don't remember the name, but those, I think that stuff, I mean, it always can things can be better, but I think that area is really good. But then kind of what you were alluding to, right, is the other places, and I think they were called signature strategies, I don't remember exactly, but kind of diving into those and getting that, kind of what he talked about. So at least from my perspective, I think I think that first part's we have pretty good, but it's those pieces, that would be my perspective related to strategic plan. And then I think, and this isn't to answer now, but I think on the next like follow-up as there is next steps, I think related to like Gudio, when you were talking about kind of the potential next step with teachers, right? And kind of if people are wanting to and they're ready, kind of forming these teams, I was just thinking about that is gonna take additional work and time for teachers, right? So I'm thinking like if I'm a teacher, right, it's kind of, we talked about this before, and I think Peggy brought it up again today, right? That space of we don't want teachers to feel like this is just one more thing I have to do, one more thing that's being put on my plate. So I could imagine some teachers saying, like, if you're giving us this, what are you taking away, or how are you going to support me in new or different ways with this added piece? So I think clearly, I mean, the most important people to articulate that to is the teachers, but I think when you follow with us on next steps, I would love to hear some of that as well.
And I would be open to seeing proposals for partnerships.
Anything else?
Okay, well, I just want to, again, thank you, Scott and Arenda, for doing all this work and bringing us this information and suggestions. I do feel like we have so much opportunity here. You can see that we have all the conditions of potential greatness, you know, and we need to align our systems and get to work with that. Looking forward to what's coming up. If there's nothing further, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. It is now 9:29. Thank you.